This is it, the ultimate dimension for rest and stories, and it's called Sleepy Myths.
Hey there, before we begin tonight's story, take a slow breath. You made it here, to this quiet space, this gentle corner of the universe where time finally loosens its grip. We truly love that you're here with us, choosing calm over chaos, choosing stillness when the world has asked you to keep running. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Maybe it's late. Maybe your eyes feel heavy. Maybe the day asked too much of you. That's okay, you've arrived. So go ahead, grab your coffee or maybe your blanket. Let's drift together into a story about a boy who looked like everyone, but dreamed like no one else. They said the Citadel never slept. It hummed like a living thing, a city stretched between stars, where every light was a life, and every corridor led to another version of the same dream. Inside one of those thousands of tiny rooms, a young Morty woke up. He wasn't sure if he'd been dreaming or if he was still in one. The air shimmered faintly like it carried memories. The walls gleamed with reflections, endless faces, all his own, stretching into infinity. Each one blinked a half-second after him, like shy echoes trying to keep up. For a while he just watched them, the countless Mortys, the endless copies, the ocean of sameness, and somewhere between those reflections, a thought whispered, quiet as breath, why do I feel different? He didn't know what that meant yet. He was supposed to feel the same. The Citadel liked sameness. It called it harmony. It called it balance. But to Morty it felt like being a single drop of water trying not to make ripples. The ceiling above his bed flickered faintly, showing the simulation sky, a soft shade of blue that never changed. No sunrise, no sunset, just an endless morning that belonged to everyone and no one. He stretched, rubbing his eyes, and heard it again. That sound. It wasn't music, it wasn't speech. It was the low, steady hum of the Citadel's heart, the sound of countless doors opening and closing all at once. Somewhere, someone was always leaving, and someone else was always arriving. The city breathed through those doors. He lay there, listening, feeling as if the sound itself was calling to him, not with words but with rhythm. It said, wake up. But he was already awake. The corridors were long and curved, their lights pulsing gently like veins. Every few meters, another door hissed open, releasing a boy who looked exactly like him, yawning, carrying the same bag, walking the same pace. Morty fell into line, as he always did, rows and rows of them, Mortys marching toward their assigned classrooms, quiet as ghosts. Their sneakers made no sound on the silver floors. The only thing louder than silence was the hum, still echoing. The Citadel taught them order. It taught them usefulness. A Morty's role was simple: assist a Rick, obey a Rick, never question the logic of the smartest beings in the multiverse. But sometimes, even logic can't quiet a heartbeat. Morty felt it again, that quiet pull in his chest, like something unseen tugging him toward a door he wasn't supposed to open. He tried to ignore it, but the thought kept returning, soft but insistent. What if there's something beyond this place? He didn't say it out loud. You didn't say things like that here. Questions like that had a way of disappearing, like people did. Still, when he walked past the mirrored walls, he caught his own reflection and noticed something strange. Most Mortys didn't look back. They kept their eyes low, careful not to break formation. But this reflection, his reflection, was looking right at him. And for the first time it didn't blink second. At night, when the Citadel dimmed its artificial lights, Morty couldn't sleep. The hum in the distance felt closer now, like footsteps behind his thoughts. He stared at the ceiling until the walls began to fade into dreamlike shapes. Shifting corridors, soft lights, doors opening into endless other doors. He imagined stepping through one, and then another, until maybe, just maybe, he found a room where no one looked like him. In that room, maybe there'd be sky, a real one, not blue, painted glass or artificial dawn, but a sky that breathed, that changed, that had stars no machine could copy. He tried to picture what stars would feel like, what silence would sound like without the hum. He imagined holding it in his hands, like something fragile and alive, and then he whispered into the dark, can one drop of water ever feel lonely in an ocean? The question floated there, unanswered. But in that moment, something subtle stirred in the air, like the Citadel itself had heard him. The next morning the halls felt different. Not visibly, no one else noticed, but Morty did. Every door he passed seemed to breathe, as if aware. He brushed his fingers against the cold metal of one, and for a split second he felt warmth. It scared him. But it also filled him with a kind of wonder he couldn't explain. That day in class, while the instructor droned on about hierarchical balance between Ricks and Mortys, Morty caught a glimpse of the window. It wasn't a real one, just a projection showing a perfect blue expanse. But even in that illusion, he thought he saw something flicker, a shadow crossing the sky. A ship, maybe, or maybe just a trick of the light. Still, his heart reacted before his mind could stop it. It beat faster, quietly, stubbornly alive. For the first time, Morty wondered if anyone else could hear it, that heartbeat, that hum beneath the hum. He wanted to ask. He almost did. But when he turned to the Morty beside him, the other boy's eyes were empty, glazed like glass catching light but not keeping it. So he swallowed the words and sat back down. That night, the hum returned. Softer now, deeper, almost melodic. It wasn't just doors anymore. It was something else, something calling him from within the Citadel's endless chambers. He rose from bed and stood before the mirrored wall. His reflection blinked again, perfectly timed this time. Ordinary, normal. But when he turned away just before stepping back into bed, the reflection didn't turn with him. It lingered. A heartbeat behind, watching. And though Morty didn't see it, that reflection's lips parted, just barely, as if to whisper something through the glass. A single word, soft as breath. Soon, the hum deepened. The Citadel exhaled, and somewhere behind 1,000 identical doors, a single thought began to bloom, small, fragile, unstoppable. Something was waking up. Morning arrived the way it always did in the Citadel, not as sunlight, but as light pretending to be sunlight. It spilled from the ceilings like liquid glass, pale and quiet, coating the hallways in a soft silver hue. The sound of footsteps came next, perfectly synchronized. The shuffle of countless Mortys walking to class. No one spoke. There was no need. Everyone already knew what everyone would say. Morty took his place among them. One more ripple in an ocean of sameness. But inside, he carried something that didn't match. Something that hummed differently. A thought, a memory, a question that had followed him from his dream. When they entered the classroom, their seats folded open automatically, neat rows of metal and light. The room itself was a sphere, every wall mirrored. 1,000 Mortys reflected from every angle, sitting in perfect formation. When they moved together. When they blinked, the sound of it was like soft rain. The instructor, a Rick with tired eyes and a voice that carried no warmth, began the lesson. His coat shimmered faintly beneath the artificial lights, the badge on his chest glowing blue. Today's concept, he said, his tone clipped and mechanical, his efficiency. A Morty's greatest trait. His words echoed across the mirrored room. Efficiency, obedience, predictability. Morty's mind drifted. He wasn't trying to be defiant. His thoughts just slipped away sometimes, like birds that didn't want to be caged. He watched his own reflection across the room, noticing the tiniest delay in the movement of one mirror, self almost invisible. A flicker, and then a smile. A faint one, not his. Morty blinked, and the reflection corrected itself, returning to perfect synchronicity. But for that heartbeat, the air had felt charged, alive, watching him. He tried to focus. The Rick continued speaking. A Rick needs a Morty. The universe demands balance, intellect and empathy, chaos and restraint. But a Morty without a Rick, he paused, clicking his tongue, is just noise. Morty felt the words settle into the room like dust. All the other boys nodded in perfect rhythm, eyes glazed in polite understanding. He wanted to nod too. He almost did. But instead he glanced at the mirrored wall again and whispered inside his mind, what if noise is the start of a new song? The hours stretched like clear syrup, slow and sticky. Equations floated across holographic boards. Simulations blinked in the air. Every few minutes, the Rick would stop to remind them that understanding was less important than repetition. Memorize, don't imagine. Imagination leads to error, he said, tapping the board. Morty's pencil paused. His reflection didn't. And in that pause, he saw it again. A hairline crack running through the mirrored wall behind the instructor. It was small, nearly invisible, but it shimmered differently, catching light in an uneven rhythm. Something inside him fluttered. The kind of feeling you get when you see a door that shouldn't exist. During break, the Mortys filed out in silence. Their movements were eerily graceful, like the gears of a clock turning in unison. Morty stayed back for a moment, pretending to tie his shoe, but really he was watching the mirror. The crack was still there. Thin, delicate, beautiful. He leaned closer, and for the first time he realized it wasn't just a crack. It was breathing. The glass inhaled faintly. Just enough for him to see a ripple in its reflection, like heat above sand. When he exhaled, it exhaled too. He didn't touch it. He only whispered, "Can you hear me?" The glass didn't answer, but somewhere deep within the Citadel's hum, a softer note joined the melody. One he hadn't heard before. That afternoon, as the lessons dragged on, Morty noticed small things. A teacher's sigh when no one was listening. A flicker in the overhead lights, like a heartbeat trying to match his. A faint whisper between two Mortys that sounded almost like laughter. Something forbidden here. He looked at them, and for the first time one of them looked back. Not long, just a second, but enough. In that second, Morty saw curiosity, the same kind that lived in him, and in that recognition something passed between them. a shared awareness, as if two mirrors had aligned perfectly, reflecting not just each other, but the possibility of something beyond reflection itself. He didn't know that boy's name. He didn't need to. Names meant little here. Connection meant everything. When the lesson ended, the Rick dismissed them with the same indifferent gesture as always. Return to your stations. Tomorrow, we'll study the Citadel's history of optimization. Try not to dream too much in the meantime. That last line, half a joke, half a warning, followed Morty down the corridor like a ghost. He walked in silence, surrounded by the endless procession of himself. The walls glimmered softly. The hum was steady again. But inside his chest, something had shifted, a rhythm slightly out of sync with the world around him. It felt wrong and somehow right. That night, as he lay in bed, the hum returned stronger. The reflections on the ceiling rippled, subtle waves of light passing through them. He thought again of the crack in the wall. He could still see it in his mind. That thin, trembling fracture like a scar across perfection. He wondered what might happen if he pressed his hand to it. Would it break? Or would it open? His eyelids grew heavy, but his mind refused to rest. In the space between waking and dreaming, he saw himself standing before the mirror again. Only this time, the mirror wasn't a wall. It was a doorway. Beyond it, faint and golden, was something that almost looked like sky. He stepped closer. The reflection moved closer too, but slower, softer. He raised his hand, and so did it. Their fingertips nearly touched, a breath apart, and then the mirror whispered back, not in words but in sound. A lullaby, distant and sad, like a child humming in another room. He felt it in his chest before he heard it in his ears, a melody of sameness breaking apart. When he finally fell asleep, that song followed him into the dark, a slow, tender promise that somewhere, behind all those mirrored walls, something different was waiting to be found. The next morning began with silence, not the ordinary kind, but the kind that waits for someone brave enough to break it. The Citadel moved as it always did, in rhythm and repetition. Doors opened, doors closed. Lights flickered awake in patterns too precise to be human. The hum that filled the air wasn't just a sound anymore to Morty. It was a question wearing the disguise of harmony. He followed the stream of identical boys through the curved corridors, but his mind had already slipped somewhere else. Back to the mirror from yesterday, the faint crack that seemed to breathe. He could still feel it beneath his fingertips, though he'd never touched it. His thoughts were beginning to bloom faster than he could hide them. And in a place like this, thoughts could be dangerous. When they reached the classroom, everything looked the same: the mirrored walls, the faint smell of sterilized air, the teacher's voice slicing through stillness. But today, the world didn't feel the same. Morty noticed the smallest things: how the light pulsed a second late when the Rick spoke, how one Morty's shoes squeaked slightly off-beat, how his own heartbeat echoed faintly in his ears like a second metronome. The lesson was about purpose. Rick tapped a screen with his stylus. A Morty exists to stabilize, he said. Chaos must be paired with control. Intelligence requires emotional ballast. You are ballast. He said the last word with a faint smile, as though it were a compliment. Around the room, the Mortys nodded in unison. Morty did not. He stared at the holographic diagrams of brains and neurons glowing above the teacher's head. Each labeled line pointed to something measurable: logic, obedience, response time. But nowhere was there a label for wonder. He raised his hand. The teacher looked surprised. Questions weren't part of the program. Yes, student. Morty's voice trembled, though his heart didn't. Sir, why do we need to be ballast? The Rick blinked, stylus pausing midair. Because Morty, Ricks need balance. Without Morty's, Ricks lose perspective. That's the order of things. But what if? He swallowed. What if there's more to us than that? What if we're not just? The Rick's voice cut through his sentence, calm but cold. Curiosity is admirable within bounds. Stay inside them. The class returned to silence. The hum deepened, filling the room like fog. Morty lowered his hand. But inside his chest, something refused to lower with it. That night, he dreamt of doors again. Endless corridors of silver, every door humming softly like it knew his name. He tried opening one, but each led to another door, another version of himself waiting behind it. Some smiled, some cried, some stared blankly, their eyes hollow mirrors. When he woke, he realized his dream hadn't felt like a dream at all. It had felt like memory. Days began to blur. The Citadel's rhythm pressed on, but Morty was no longer marching in perfect step. He began to linger, to observe. He noticed how some Ricks looked tired, really tired, beneath their cleverness. How some Mortys laughed quietly when no one was watching. How even the metal walls had tiny imperfections if you looked long enough. It was in those imperfections that Morty started finding meaning. He began writing notes in the margins of his worksheets. Not answers, but questions. What if the Citadel isn't infinite? What happens to the Mortys who stop following? Who was the first one to ask why? He never showed them to anyone. He folded them small and slipped them into the pocket of his jacket, like seeds waiting for spring. One afternoon, during simulation hour, something unexpected happened. The students were practicing assistive coordination, controlling virtual Ricks through pre-set problem-solving exercises. Morty's screen flickered once, then glitched, showing static. For a moment, everything froze, and then the static formed a shape. A face. A Rick's face, but older, lined with something that looked like regret. And through the static, a faint whisper, "Don't stop asking, kid." Morty's heart thudded so loudly he thought the others might hear it. But when he looked around, everyone else was frozen, eyes fixed on their own simulations. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The face faded, the hum returned, the screen normalized, but Morty knew he hadn't imagined it. That night he climbed out of bed long after lights out. The corridors were dim, washed in pale blue. Each step he took echoed softly, blending with the Citadel's steady pulse. He walked without knowing where he was going, only that the question inside him was leading. He passed storage bays, dormitories, labs. Every door looked the same, but every handle felt slightly different. Some were colder, some heavier. It was as if each one carried the memory of every hand that had turned it before. Finally, he stopped before one door that hummed faintly higher than the rest, almost like it was singing. He hesitated, then whispered to himself, "Why not?" The door slid open soundlessly. Inside was nothing remarkable, just an empty classroom long forgotten. Dust gathered in soft constellations on the floor, but on one wall there was writing, faint, almost erased. Morty brushed his hand over it and felt words carved into the metal ask, even when no one answers. The letters were rough, uneven. Maybe another Morty had written them long ago. Maybe more than one. He sat down on the cold floor and stared at the message for a long time. The hum of the Citadel sounded different here, less mechanical, more like a heartbeat. He realized something then, not a revelation, but a feeling. That maybe every Morty who had ever felt different had left behind little marks like this one, hoping someone would find them. Maybe the Citadel wasn't just walls and machines. Maybe it was built from all those hidden questions. He closed his eyes and whispered into the dark room, "I won't stop asking." The hum answered back, soft and low, as if approving. He sat there until he drifted between waking and dreaming again, head resting against the wall, surrounded by the faint glow of forgotten lessons. In that half-sleep, the reflection from the mirrored classroom appeared once more in his mind, the one that had smiled at him. This time it spoke, not with words, but with warmth, and for the first time, Morty didn't feel alone inside the endless sameness. He felt part of something vast and unfinished, a question still unfolding. When morning came, he returned to class like always. He took his seat, opened his notebook, and wrote a single line at the top of the page before the lesson began, "Why not me?" And though no one else could see it, that small sentence glowed faintly. A spark in a sea of repetition. To be continued in Chapter 4, The Friend Who Painted the Sky. The hum of the Citadel never stopped. It only changed color. Some nights it sounded blue, others silver, and once, just once, Morty thought he heard it sound like a sigh. He had begun to walk differently now, slower, more aware, like someone listening to invisible music. His teachers noticed, but didn't ask. Morty's weren't meant to move with rhythm, they were meant to follow. Yet something inside him was quietly shifting. The candle of curiosity now steady, patient, glowing. That was when he met the boy with the dust on his fingers. It happened in one of the old maintenance corridors, where the walls still carried faint fingerprints of forgotten Ricks. Morty had been sent there for inventory duty, an ordinary punishment disguised as productivity. The hallway smelled like rust and echo. He turned a corner and saw another boy crouched near the wall, drawing something into the dust with a broken stylus. Morty froze. The boy didn't look up right away. His focus was absolute, like he was writing a secret that the walls themselves might try to erase. When he finally noticed Morty, he smiled, not the uniform, polite smile they were taught to perform, but something real. "Hey," the boy said softly. "Don't step on it." Morty looked down. In the dust at his feet, stretched across the floor, was a drawing, a sky, not a technical diagram, not a blueprint or schematic, but a sky, messy, infinite, childlike. The boy had drawn little stars, uneven and glowing faintly in the dim light. Morty blinked. "What's that?" The boy grinned. "You've never seen one? Not like that." He pointed up toward the ceiling, toward the cold steel of the Citadel. "They say there's light out there, real light. And in that light, dots of fire. Some say they move. Some say they sing." He looked back down at his dusty mural, eyes soft. "So I draw them to remember what I've never seen." Morty crouched beside him. For a long time they said nothing, just sat there, two small figures in the endless machine, staring at the fragile image of something bigger than themselves. His name was Eli Morty, though everyone called him EM. He wasn't like the others. He hummed when he worked. He made small paper birds out of training sheets and set them adrift through the air vents. He whispered to them as if they might actually fly somewhere free. Every day after lessons, Morty would find excuses to slip away to that same corridor. EM was always there, painting the dust anew. Sometimes he drew constellations, other times swirling galaxies. One day, he drew something different. A single bright star with a smaller one beside it. "What's that?" Morty asked. "It's us," EM said simply. "Two lights that shouldn't exist, but do anyway." Morty laughed quietly. "We're not stars, dude." "Maybe not," EM said, still smiling. "But don't you ever feel like something out there is calling? Like there's a sound we're supposed to hear, but the Citadel's hum is too loud?" Morty looked at him, unsure how to answer. Because yes, he'd felt it too. That quiet pull toward something unnamed. A world without mirrors. Days turned to weeks. The friendship grew in secret, soft as a whispered song. They talked about strange dreams, of skies that changed color, of oceans that breathed, of doors that opened to warmth instead of order. They began leaving messages for each other in tiny cracks between the wall panels, just words carved by fingernails, still here, still awake. Every mark was a rebellion, small and beautiful. Sometimes EM would bring scraps of colored foil he'd scavenged from discarded electronics. He'd crush them into tiny stars and press them into Morty's palm. "Keep it," he'd say. "Even fake stars can remind us what's real." And Morty would. Each piece of foil felt like hope disguised as trash, but nothing in the Citadel stays unseen forever, not even friendship. One morning, Morty arrived at the corridor to find it empty. The dust mural had been wiped clean. The stylus was gone. For a moment, he thought maybe EM was just late. But as hours passed, the hum of the Citadel grew heavier, thicker, like it was hiding something. When he asked around, other Mortys looked away. Finally, one whispered, "He got taken." Reconditioning. The word landed like a shard of glass. Reconditioning. They said it meant help. They said it made you aligned again. But everyone knew that when someone came back, they weren't them anymore. That night, Morty went back to the corridor. He knelt down and traced a star into the dust, just one, a small flicker of remembrance. The air vents whispered softly above, carrying distant echoes of laughter, metal and machinery. He closed his eyes and could almost hear EM's humming again. He whispered into the dark, "Wherever you are, I'll remember." The hum seemed to answer back, faint but kind, a lullaby made of static. Days passed, lessons resumed. The world didn't pause for grief. Morty went through the motions, repeating words, memorizing formulas, nodding on cue. But inside, something was quietly rewriting itself. Loss had become a kind of teacher. He began noticing others, Mortys with faraway looks in their eyes, Ricks who hesitated before speaking. Tiny fractures in the Citadel's illusion of perfection. And he thought of EM again, of the boy who painted skies from dust. How he never once complained, never once shouted. He just kept creating beauty quietly, even when no one was meant to see it. Morty realized that maybe rebellion didn't always need noise or fire. Maybe it could begin in silence, in kindness, in memory. So he started leaving drawings too. Small ones, hidden ones. A single line on a pipe here, a symbol scratched beneath a stair there. Nothing that could be traced back to him, but enough to make another wandering Morty stop and wonder. Enough to remind someone that they weren't alone. One evening, as he finished a shift in maintenance, he caught a faint sound through the vents. A hum that rose and fell, almost melodic. It was impossible, he thought. And yet, it sounded like someone humming. The same tune EM used to hum. Soft, incomplete, but unmistakable. Morty stood there, frozen in half, light heart trembling. Was it a memory, a trick of the air, or had EM's song found its way through the metal labyrinth, refusing to die? He smiled, just barely. "Guess you really did paint the sky," he whispered. That night, before sleep, Morty dreamed again. He was standing beneath a real sky, deep, infinite, alive with motion. The stars shimmered like the dust murals come to life, and beside him a shadow, EM smiling quietly, stylus in hand. Together they painted the horizon until dawn. There are nights in the Citadel when the air itself seems to breathe. It moves through the metal corridors like a ghost that never learned silence, slipping past classrooms, sleeping quarters, endless halls of sameness. If you stay awake long enough, you can hear it. A low hum, a whisper traveling through pipes and vents, carrying secrets no one is meant to hear. Morty had started listening. He didn't know why, not exactly. Maybe it was because sleep had become a stranger lately, or maybe because in the stillness after lights out, his mind replayed old things, dust drawings, laughter that ended too soon. A friend's name whispered into emptiness. That night the hum changed. It began faintly, a tremor in the wall behind his bed. At first he thought it was the building sighing again, the The Citadel always did that, like a tired god adjusting its bones. But then beneath the sigh came something else, a voice soft, static, wan, and unbearably human. "Wake up." Morty sat upright. The words had been swallowed by the vents almost before he heard them, but they left a shape in the air, like the ghost of sound lingering behind his heartbeat. He waited. Nothing. Only the mechanical pulse of the Citadel, the constant breath of millions who didn't dream anymore. He lay back down and stared at the ceiling, wide-eyed in the half-dark. Maybe it had been a trick of the air. Or maybe, just maybe, someone was trying to speak. The next day passed like all days did in the Citadel, a cycle of control disguised as order. The teachers repeated the lessons of obedience. The screens played loops of Ricks discussing progress and prosperity. The other Mortys wrote down every word, eyes blank and shining. Morty copied the motions, but not the meaning. He heard nothing but the echo of that whisper. When the lights dimmed for rest, he waited again. Hours passed. The building's hum deepened. Then it came, faint, skipping through static. "Freedom, false gods, wake up." The words cracked like broken glass, yet they carried warmth. Not the cold precision of a Rick's voice, but something older, almost kind. A man who had seen too much and still wanted to believe. Morty pressed his ear to the wall. The metal was cool, trembling softly against his skin. He whispered, "Who are you?" No answer. Only the hum, like a slow heartbeat, counting the quiet between questions. Over the next weeks, he began to live for those nights. He stopped sleeping entirely sometimes, lying still in the dark, listening. The voice never spoke in full sentences, just fragments, breaths, static sighs that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sometimes it was low and tired. Sometimes it was urgent, almost pleading. And sometimes it sounded like it was right beside him, whispering through the thin skin of the world. He started leaving small marks where the voice felt strongest. A circle scratched with a nail, a symbol he barely understood. Each mark felt like an answer in a conversation that only one side knew was happening. He wasn't sure what the voice wanted from him. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. One evening, while cleaning one of the maintenance corridors, Morty noticed something strange. A vent panel slightly bent at the edge, as if someone had pried it open before. He hesitated, glancing around. The corridor was empty. The hum filled it like fog. He crouched down and pulled the panel free. Inside, darkness, a maze of pipes, cables, and thin streams of air flowing like invisible rivers. And then a flicker. A faint blue light blinked deep within, pulsing once, twice in time with the hum. He leaned closer. The light blinked again, then steadied. Static filled his ears and the voice returned, clearer than before. They built walls around thought, but thought finds cracks. "Wake up, Morty." He flinched backward, heart pounding. The voice knew his name. He whispered, "How do you know me?" The light dimmed, like an eyelid closing. Silence again. He sat there for a long time, breathing in the metal dust, feeling the floor vibrate beneath him. He didn't know if he was afraid or alive in a new way. Maybe both. After that night, the world around him began to look different. The teachers' voices sounded mechanical. The other Morty's laughter echoed hollow. Even the stars painted on the walls of the Citadel's learning centers looked too neat, too symmetrical, like someone had copied them from memory rather than from truth. He started noticing things he shouldn't. A locked door at the end of a corridor he'd never seen before. A camera that always turned away when he passed. A quiet flicker in the power lights that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the whisper's words. The voice had changed him. Or maybe it had reminded him who he'd been before forgetting was taught. One night, while others slept, he crawled through the vent. It was colder than he expected, narrow, the kind of place meant for air, not people. But he moved quietly, careful not to let the metal sing. The hum guided him like a compass made of sound. After a long crawl, he reached a junction where several vents crossed. There, carved faintly into the metal, were words, shaky, desperate, we wonder who. Below them, a small speaker, old, corroded, almost hidden. The source of the voice. Morty touched it gently. "Who are you?" he whispered again. The speaker crackled. For a long moment, only static. Then, someone who asked too many questions. The sound faded, then returned weaker. "They silenced me. But sound travels, Morty's sound remembers." He pressed closer, whisper trembling. "What do you want me to do?" "Listen," the voice said. And then, softer, almost tender, "You already are." The static sighed once more, and the light inside the vent blinked out. Morty stayed there in the dark, his breath mingling with the last warmth of the machine. He realized he wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had turned into something gentler. Curiosity's older brother, faith. He whispered into the hollow metal, "I'll keep listening." And for a heartbeat, he thought he heard the faintest reply, something like a laugh, like relief. When he returned to his quarters, the Citadel was quiet. Too quiet. He looked out his small window. The reflection that stared back was his own, but older somehow knowing. He thought of the voice of EM, of the dust skies that used to shine beneath artificial lights. Maybe all of them were part of the same thing, the quiet rebellion of existence itself. Before lying down, he placed his hand on the cold wall beside his bed and whispered one last time, "Wake up." The wall hummed back softly, like a heartbeat answering another heartbeat through the thin veil of dreams. The Citadel slept, but Morty did not. Sleep had become a door he no longer trusted. A place too quiet, too full of memories that hummed when no one else could hear. He sat at the edge of his narrow bed, the metal floor cold beneath his bare feet, tracing invisible circles on his palm where he imagined the voice might still echo. Every sound had meaning now. The air vents whispered, pipes groaned like tired lungs. Somewhere, deep beneath the floors, something ticked, not the measured pulse of a machine, but the heartbeat of a thought waiting to be found. That was when he saw it. A glint beneath his cot, faint, almost shy. He bent down, and his fingers brushed against something cool and solid, a small, circular badge half buried in dust. He turned it over in his hand. The surface was cracked, the edges scarred. A faded emblem shimmered faintly, the insignia of the Council Guard. Morty had seen badges like this before, but only from a distance. They represented power, or at least obedience polished into metal. But this one was broken. He held it up to the faint light spilling through his window. The fracture across its center caught the glow like a fault line. Something about it felt human, imperfect, wounded, honest. He traced the crack with his thumb and whispered, "What happened to you?" No answer, of course. Only silence, patient and complete. But the badge seemed to remember something. The weight of it stirred an image, faint like a dream at the edge of waking. A Rick, once proud, standing tall. A Morty beside him, smaller but braver than most. And between them, a moment, maybe an argument, maybe a choice. Then the sound of something breaking, metal or faith. Morty blinked and the image was gone. He kept the badge hidden after that, tucked into the small pocket of his uniform near his heart, not as a trophy, not as a secret. As a reminder, during the lessons when the teachers droned about structure and destiny, he would rest his hand over it. When the other Mortys laughed in unison at jokes that weren't funny, he'd press the badge and feel its uneven crack. It grounded him, a promise that not everything had to be whole to be real. Sometimes, he wondered who it had belonged to. Had they dropped it on purpose? Had they been caught? Or had they simply decided that obedience wasn't worth polishing anymore? The thought made him smile, a tiny thing that flickered and vanished before anyone could see. One afternoon during maintenance duty, he found himself assigned to clean one of the upper corridors, a place reserved for Ricks and their appointed guards. The walls here were smoother, the air colder. Every surface gleamed like it had never been touched by dust, by fingerprints, by life. As he scrubbed the corner of a corridor panel, he noticed a faint symbol scratched into the metal. Not official, not decorative, just a line and a circle beneath it. The same symbol that appeared on his broken badge. He froze, he looked around, empty hallway, no footsteps, no eyes watching. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the badge and held it against the mark on the wall. Perfect fit. The symbol aligned like a forgotten equation remembering itself. The moment stretched. Then, from somewhere deep within the wall, a sound, soft, mechanical, like a sigh. A hidden panel shifted open by half an inch. Dust drifted down like falling stars. Morty hesitated. His breath slowed. Inside the opening, barely visible, lay another badge, newer, intact, and next to it, a folded piece of paper so old it seemed to hum with age. He reached for it, heart steady, fingers trembling just a little. The note was short, the handwriting careful, deliberate. "If you found this, then you already know. Truth is never taught here. It's found in pieces, in cracks, in silence, in questions that don't die. Don't look for freedom in fire. Look for it in kindness. It spreads quieter that way. No signature, no name. Just those lines, written like a whisper meant for one person only." Morty folded the paper back carefully, tucking it beside the broken badge. He didn't take the new badge. He left it in the wall, shining faintly like a seed planted in darkness. When he closed the panel, the sound it made was gentle, like the world exhaling. That night, as he lay awake, he thought about what the note meant. Truth is found in pieces. He remembered the dust murals EM used to draw, the whispers in the vents, the voice that had said, "Wake up." Each one was a piece, small, fragile, incomplete. But together, they began to form something larger, a shape, an understanding, a quiet map toward what freedom might feel like. He turned the broken badge in his hand again. The crack glimmered like a tiny river of light. Maybe it wasn't broken, he thought. Maybe it was just unfinished. The days that followed moved slowly, like a dream remembering itself. Morty went through his routines, lessons, cleaning, quiet meals. But the badge changed how he saw things. He noticed the way other Mortys avoided eye contact too quickly, as if afraid to see themselves reflected back. He noticed how some Ricks hesitated before giving orders, glancing down hallways like they too heard whispers in the vents. Maybe everyone had something broken in their pocket. Maybe everyone carried a secret they didn't yet know how to name. And perhaps, he thought, the Citadel's perfection wasn't its strength, it was its weakness. Because perfection couldn't breathe. Only cracks let the air in. One evening, he sat near the window that overlooked the endless lights of the Citadel. He turned the badge over one last time, pressed it to the glass, and watched the faint reflection multiply into infinity. One broken badge reflected 1,000 times until even the crack became part of the pattern. It didn't look broken anymore. It looked alive. He whispered, almost smiling. Even metal learns how to heal. Outside, the Citadel lights flickered once, perhaps coincidence, perhaps response. In that small shimmer of silence, he felt the world shift, almost imperceptibly. Something deep inside the Citadel's rhythm had changed. Later, as he drifted towards sleep, the voice from the vents returned. Faint, nearly lost to static. But this time, it wasn't warning him. It was humming. A slow, steady tune, familiar, comforting, like EM's old Sky song. Morty closed his eyes and let it wash over him, soft as breath. The voice whispered, "Where truth remembers," and then faded into the hum of the Citadel's endless night. The Citadel was a city of echoes. Every corridor reflected another. Every door led to a copy of a door, and at the heart of it all stood the Hall of Ricks, the place where perfection came to look at itself. Morty had walked these corridors before, but never this far, never past the level where the glass turned from clear to mirrored. Now the air grew thinner. Even the hum of the machinery seemed to hesitate here, like it too feared interrupting the silence. The doors were tall, far taller than they needed to be, and polished so bright that Morty could see his face reflected 100 times across their surface. Each reflection looked a little different. Older, maybe. Tired, curious, afraid. He touched the metal. Cold, unforgiving, alive. He wasn't supposed to be here. His pass had only allowed him to the maintenance level. But after what he found in the wall, the letter, the badge, something inside him refused to stop walking. The words kept repeating in his head, "Truth is never taught here. It's found in pieces." Maybe this was where another piece waited. When the great doors finally opened, they did not creak or groan. They whispered, a sound too soft to belong to metal, as if they had been waiting for him all along. The hall stretched endlessly. Rows of portraits lined its walls, thousands upon thousands of Ricks, each painted with impossible precision. Every face was different, yet all were the same eyes that laughed at gravity, the same smirk that bent universes, the same exhaustion hidden behind genius. But what struck Morty most wasn't the sameness, it was the loneliness. Each Rick was alone in his frame, frozen in triumph that somehow looked like grief. He walked slowly, his footsteps soft against the marble floor. The air shimmered faintly, not with dust, but with static. The hall was alive with data streams, memory ghosts, the whispers of digital records long since forgotten. One portrait caught his eye, a Rick standing not in a lab, but in a field of stars, holding a small, round badge in his hand. Morty's breath hitched. The same badge, cracked through the center, beneath the frame a small brass plate read RICKC 137. The name echoed inside him like thunder behind glass. He didn't know why, but it felt familiar. He reached out, not to touch the painting, but to feel the air near it. The static buzzed stronger here. A flicker, then a shimmer, then the painting moved. The Rick in the portrait turned his head, eyes meeting Morty's. For a moment, the world held its breath. "Morty," the painted Rick said softly. "You shouldn't be here." Morty froze. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. His mind tumbled. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. And yet, the voice carried warmth, fatigue, and something else he hadn't heard in a long time. "Don't look so surprised," Rick continued, his expression gentle. "This place remembers everything. Even mistakes. The background behind him, the stars, flickered like static on an old screen. Are you real?" Morty whispered finally. "Define real," the Rick said with a half smile. "I'm a recording, maybe? A fragment. Maybe just guilt pretending to be memory." He leaned closer, his eyes sharp and kind at once. "Either way, if you made it here, you're already further than most Mortys ever go." The Morty's hands trembled. He wanted to ask 1,000 things, about the badge, the note, the voice in the vents, but the words tangled. Rick seemed to read his silence. "You found the badge, how I hoped someone would." He sighed. "They called me a traitor, said I was dismantling order. But order's just another kind of prison if no one can breathe inside it." Morty felt the world blur slightly. He didn't know this Rick. Not really. But the cadence in his voice stirred something deep, something that felt like home. "Why me?" Morty asked. "Why am I hearing this?" Rick's painted eyes softened. Because you listen. The walls shimmered again and suddenly the lights dimmed. The portraits along the hall began to hum, faintly at first, then louder, overlapping frequencies forming a chorus of voices. Each painting flickered, each Rick whispering something under his breath. Equations, memories, apologies. It was overwhelming, a storm of thought. Morty covered his ears, but the sound wasn't in the air. It was inside him. The hall wasn't just a gallery. It was a memory bank, a vault of consciousness, a sea of fragments preserved from every Rick who had ever lived and died. "Morty," said the voice again, steady amid the chaos. "If you want to understand the Citadel, follow the silence, not the noise." The sound collapsed into stillness. When Morty opened his eyes, the hall was empty again. The portraits were still. The air calm. Only one remained faintly lit. Rick C-137 smiling faintly, his eyes wary. Morty stepped back, pulse steady, breath slow. "Follow the silence," he repeated under his breath. He turned to leave, but something glimmered near the exit. A small device embedded in the floor. It pulsed once like a heartbeat. Morty knelt and brushed the dust away. Another note etched into the metal base. Read, "For the one who still wonders." He pressed his palm against the device. It clicked softly and a hidden compartment opened, revealing a holographic sphere, pale blue and trembling like water. Inside it, brief images flickered, a younger Rick arguing with a council, a group of Mortys protesting quietly in the corridors, a Citadel guard dropping a broken badge, a flash of light, then silence. The message ended as quickly as it began. Morty's reflection in the sphere looked older somehow, not in years but in understanding. He pocketed the hologram, stood, and looked one last time down the long corridor of Rick's. The air felt lighter now, as if the hall itself had been waiting to exhale. When he stepped outside, the Citadel's hum greeted him like a familiar ocean. He paused at the threshold and looked back. The great doors closed behind him with a whisper. For a moment, he imagined all the portraits inside, 1,000 Ricks watching one small Morty walk away, and for the first time the idea didn't frighten him. It comforted him, because maybe, in some quiet way, even the Ricks were waiting to be saved. He walked back into the maze of corridors, following not the lights but the spaces between them. The silence that threaded through the Citadel like a secret map. Each step was soft, each echo was an answer, and somewhere, deep in the vents, a voice began to hum again. The same gentle melody as before, only this time it harmonized with his footsteps. Morty smiled. For the first time, the Citadel didn't feel infinite, it felt alive. And within that endless hum of machinery and memory, a single truth began to form. Fragile, unfinished, but his. When you live inside a world made of reflections, you start to mistake movement for progress. That was what the glass elevators taught Morty. They glittered like veins of light through the Citadel, connecting 1,000 towers of Ricks. Every floor a laboratory, every level a new illusion of hierarchy. From afar, the elevators looked beautiful. Transparent shafts stretching toward the infinite, glimmering with the motion of white lights rising and falling, like breaths trapped inside a mechanical lung. Morty used to stare at them as a child, thinking they led to somewhere special, to a place above the sameness, a place where truth might live. But now he worked inside them, polishing their walls, tightening their bolts, ensuring that the illusion never cracked. It was quiet work, and quiet work was safest. Each morning, the same ritual, a soft chime, the hiss of pressure equalizing, the slow rise through a corridor of glass. From here, he could see the whole Citadel reflected 1,000 times over, an endless pattern of towers folding into themselves. It was beautiful in the way deserts are beautiful, silent, endless, and unknowingly cruel. The Ricks passed by him like ghosts. They never looked at the maintenance Mortys. To them, the glass was supposed to be invisible, just as the ones who cleaned it were supposed to be invisible. But Morty had learned to see through invisibility. He began to notice things others didn't. The small pauses in the elevator's hum, the faint residue of fingerprints on the inside panels, the way certain Ricks never pressed the top buttons, only descended. Every ascent, he realized, had a matching descent. Every rise mirrored a fall. He found the symmetry both haunting and comforting. In the Citadel, even the laws of irony obeyed gravity. Sometimes, when the elevators were empty and the lights dimmed, he would sit on the floor and listen. The glass hummed faintly under his fingertips. It carried vibrations, words, perhaps from the other elevators. The Citadel was full of voices, always whispering through walls and wires. If you were still enough, you could almost hear what the city was thinking. One night, after the Hall of Ricks, he stayed longer than he should have. He wanted silence, and silence was rare here. He sat with his back to the glass, watching the reflection of his own face multiplied into infinity. Each reflection blinked a little slower, like versions of himself falling asleep. Then, from the glass beside him came a sound, a soft click, then another, Then a small mechanical whine, like breathing made of metal. The elevator began to move, but no one had called it. The lights dimmed to a pale blue, and a faint haze filled the shaft. The control panel lit up with symbols he had never seen. Morty stood heart-thudding. The elevator was descending down, further down than any level he knew existed. As the walls slipped past, he saw brief flashes through the glass, glimpses of forgotten levels, rooms without lights, laboratories filled with dust, statues of Rick's half-built, half-dismantled, floors that had been sealed off long ago. He felt as though he was sinking through layers of memory, the Citadel's underbelly, where all the abandoned ideas were left to rot. Finally, the elevator stopped, the doors opened onto darkness. Morty hesitated, then stepped forward. His reflection followed. It was a maintenance floor, old, silent, buried beneath the official maps. The air smelled faintly of oil and something older, something like rusted sunlight. He raised his wrist light, and the beam revealed broken panels, shattered glass, and a strange mural etched into the wall. It was a design of the Citadel itself, but inverted upside down as if the true Citadel existed beneath the one everyone could see. At the mural's center was an inscription, scrawled in hurried handwriting, "Every rise carries its fall." Morty's chest tightened. He thought of the elevators again, of their endless motion, of the illusion of ascent. Maybe the whole Citadel worked that way, a machine pretending to move forward, but never really changing. And then he saw it. Tucked into the corner of the mural, almost hidden beneath a layer of dust, a small, metallic handprint, not Rick's, smaller. Morty brushed it clean and whispered, "Someone's been here before." He sat there for a long time, watching the faint reflection of his light ripple across the glass floor. For the first time, the city above felt fragile, like something that could be undone with a whisper. He didn't want to destroy it, he just wanted to understand it. And maybe that was worse. He remembered the words from the portrait. Follow the silence, not the noise. So he listened. Through the hum of the elevator's cables, through the pulse of electricity in the walls, he heard something faint. A rhythm, a quiet pattern beneath the chaos, like a heartbeat too slow for the machines to notice. He pressed his ear to the wall. The sound came from below. The next day he told no one. He returned to his normal duties, polishing, tightening, pretending not to think. But every time an elevator rose, he imagined the unseen descent mirrored beneath his feet. Every smile from a Rick felt rehearsed. Every corridor seemed built to distract. He began to think that maybe freedom didn't mean climbing upward. Maybe it meant learning how deep the floor went. At night, he dreamed of falling through glass. Not breaking it, just passing through it, weightless, endless, free. Weeks passed. The memory of the hidden mural stayed with him. So did the phrase, "Every rise carries its fall." He began to test it in small ways, letting an elevator stall between levels just to see what would happen. Nothing catastrophic, just a flicker in the lights, a pause in the hum, like the Citadel hesitating to breathe. He felt a strange satisfaction each time. Not defiance, not rebellion, something softer. Like a quiet note slipping into a song that didn't expect it. He was still only a maintenance worker. Still one Morty among thousands. But for the first time, he felt as though he had found the edge of something. A seam in the illusion. And once you see the seam, you can't unsee it. That night, he stood again in the elevator, watching the reflections multiply. He thought of his lost friend, the one who used to paint stars in dust. He imagined the boy's hands pressed to this same glass, drawing constellations in fog. He whispered to him softly, "I think I found your sky." The elevator rose, and somewhere unseen, another elevator descended, carrying its ghost reflection. For the first time, Morty didn't feel trapped between them. He felt balanced. Like he understood the truth hidden in motion. The higher you rise, the clearer you see what's below. And sometimes what's below is exactly where the light begins. The Citadel slept around him, humming, dreaming, unaware. And in that silence between ascent and descent, one small boy stood inside a glass cage and began quietly to wake up. The Citadel never slept completely. Even in the quiet hours, when the hallways dimmed and the lights softened to amber, there was always a hum, a soft vibration under the skin of the world, like breathing made of metal. It was the kind of sound that kept thoughts alive when you wished they would rest. Morty had learned to live with it, to let the sound cradle him instead of fight it. But that night, the hum seemed different, slower, deeper, almost lonely. He sat at his desk, a small, flickering light above him, a half-used pen trembling between his fingers. On the wall behind him hung the faint shadow of the badge. It swayed slightly whenever the air vents sighed. He didn't know why he felt compelled to write. Maybe it was because the city was too quiet, or because silence had become the only voice left that understood him. He began with a name, one he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Dear E.M., the ink blurred softly across the page like a memory trying to find its shape. He hesitated. How did you speak to someone who might no longer exist? He remembered EM's laugh, not loud, not bright, just a small sound that made rooms feel less empty. He remembered the way EM used to draw with dust, tracing galaxies across the wall, as if he already knew that art didn't need to last to be real. Morty wrote, "You were right about the stars, they're not far. They're just hidden behind glass." He paused, smiled faintly, and continued, "I clean the elevators now. It's funny. They take Ricks up and down all day, pretending to go somewhere. But every rise has a fall, and every fall feels the same. Sometimes, when no one's inside, I stand there and watch my reflection multiply. It's strange how many versions of me can exist in one small space. None of them feel like the one I remember." The pen scratched softly, a sound like footsteps on a quiet floor. He wrote about the broken badge, about the mural hidden in the forgotten levels, about the note that said truth comes in pieces. He didn't know if EM would have believed him. Maybe he would have laughed, said it sounded poetic but hopeless. Morty's handwriting was uneven. The lines bent, the words leaned toward each other like they were cold. "Sometimes I think the Citadel isn't a place at all," he wrote. "It's a dream the Ricks keep having about control. Maybe we're the echoes. Maybe we're what happens when someone dreams too hard and forgets to wake up." The hum of the Citadel deepened for a moment, as if listening. Morty set his pen down, breathing quietly, feeling the ache in his chest that came whenever he told too much truth to paper. He wanted to stop there, but the words weren't done. He thought about the last day he saw EM, how the guards had come without sound, how EM hadn't looked afraid, only sad, as if he already knew where he was going. Morty had wanted to call out, but the classroom had been full of identical faces, and none of them had moved. He wrote, "You told me once that every color is just light remembering itself. I think I understand now. People are the same way. We forget what we're made of. We dim ourselves to fit the room." He leaned back and watched the ink dry. Each sentence looked like a small scar. He wondered if EM would have recognized this version of him, quieter, older in spirit, no longer afraid of the silence that used to scare him. Outside, through the small round window, the Citadel lights shimmered like a slow ocean. Morty turned the page and began again, not to report but to dream. "I think there's more out there. A place where Mortys aren't copies. A place where people don't need to be the same to feel safe. I can almost feel it sometimes, like warmth through glass. I don't know if I'll ever find it, but I think it's real because it feels like missing something I've never had." The words softened toward the end, drifting like sleep. "If you're still somewhere, I hope you found your stars. I hope they're brighter than you imagined. If you didn't, then maybe I'll find them for both of us." He placed the pen down. The hum of the Citadel filled the room again, soft, pulsing, eternal. He reread the letter once, twice, then folded it gently. The edges brushed against his fingertips like the wings of a moth. He looked around for somewhere to leave it, a drawer, a pocket, a wall. But then he thought of the badge again, of the message hidden behind glass. Quietly, he rose dressed and walked through the dim hallways. The Citadel was half asleep, monitors glowing faintly, guards murmuring through comms. Morty moved like a ghost. He reached the glass elevator and stepped inside. The lights flickered softly, reflecting 100 Mortys watching him. He smiled faintly. "You'd laugh at this, EM," he whispered. The elevator began to rise. Halfway up, he pressed his hand to the glass and whispered a small goodbye. He slipped the folded letter into the thin seam where the panels met, a secret between glass and motion, forever circling the Citadel in silence. When he pulled his hand away, he could see the faintest reflection of his face layered over the city below, hundreds of towers shining like sleeping stars. Later, when he lay in bed, he imagined the letter still moving, rising and falling, just like the Citadel's heartbeat. Somewhere, maybe, it would land. Maybe a worker would find it years from now, unfold it, and read it by the dim light of their own solitude. Maybe the words would spark something small, a question, a thought, a warmth that didn't fade. He smiled. That was enough. Not everything had to reach the person it was written for. Sometimes the act of writing was the message itself, a promise that he still remembered, that he was still here, that he still cared. He turned to the window and saw his reflection layered over the faint yellow glow of the Citadel lights. It looked almost like sunrise. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered into the air, "Good night, EM. I hope you're free somewhere." The Citadel answered in its own language, a soft tremor, a hum so low it was almost kindness. The sound settled in his chest like a heartbeat. And as his eyes closed, the boy who had once been afraid to ask why finally drifted into a dream that asked what if. Morning in the Citadel was not like morning anywhere else. There was no sun, only the illusion of one, pale light filtered through glass ceilings and reflective panels that mimicked dawn. Yet somehow the world felt a little warmer that day. Maybe the light had changed, or maybe Morty had. He woke with the sound of the vents humming softly, the same tune he'd heard in his dreams. Something about it felt almost kind. He lay there for a while, tracing patterns on his blanket, thinking of the letter still gliding through the Citadel's glass veins, his quiet message to no one and everyone at once. When he finally rose, the city outside his window shimmered with a muted gold, as if remembering something it had forgotten to feel. His tasks were simple: check the elevator gears, replace the filters, wipe the glass. But simplicity had begun to feel like a form of disguise. Beneath the calm of his routines, something small and patient had begun to grow, a seed of defiance, soft as breath. Morty didn't think of it as rebellion. He thought of it as kindness. It began with the lights. One day he noticed a hallway where half the bulbs had gone out. The maintenance system had ignored it, since it wasn't a priority zone. It was where the younger Mortys were trained, long corridors lined with desks, where lessons of obedience hummed quietly. He replaced the bulbs, not with the same sterile white ones, but with old amber lights he found in the supply closet, warmer, gentler. When the children entered the next morning, they blinked, confused at the glow. For a few seconds, they hesitated before sitting. Then one smiled. Morty saw it from the corner of the hall and felt something shift, tiny but real. Light could be an act of rebellion. Next came the food dispensers. Each machine offered identical portions, the same grey squares, the same measured nutrients. One evening, Morty slipped into the kitchen maintenance bay and adjusted the settings for one of the machines in his sector. Nothing drastic, just a fraction more sweetness, a hint of flavor. The next day, a boy took a bite, paused, and smiled as though he'd tasted memory. Morty walked past without a word. He didn't need credit. He only wanted to prove that sameness could be softened. That kindness didn't need permission. Over time, other small changes followed. He replaced the harsh alarm buzzers in one hallway with soft chimes. He rewired a door that locked too quickly so it would stay open an extra few seconds. Just enough time for someone carrying too much to pass without dropping anything. Tiny acts. Barely noticeable, but they began to spread. Other Mortys started doing similar things, adjusting cleaning drones so they moved slower near tired workers, passing an extra slice of bread at meal stations, whispering gentle warnings before inspections. No one planned it, no one named it, but it was growing, like moss on stone, quiet, persistent. One evening, Morty was summoned to repair a ventilation system near the council wing. It was one of the restricted areas, polished corridors lined with portraits of Ricks who stared down at everything like disappointed gods. He worked in silence, tightening bolts, checking valves. The guards ignored him. But as he leaned into one of the vents, he heard something: faint voices. Not orders, not lectures, conversations, and laughter. He froze. Ricks didn't laugh kindly. It was usually sharp, dismissive. But this sound was different, hesitant, almost awkward. He peeked through the grate and saw two council aides sitting on the floor, sharing contraband snacks from a maintenance box. They looked human. One said softly, "Sometimes I wonder if they're right, the Mortys. What if we've just been repeating the same pattern forever?" The other shrugged, "Maybe. But if it keeps working." "Doesn't," the first said. "Not really." Morty pulled back quietly, heart thudding. Even among Ricks there were cracks forming. That night he sat by his yellow window, badge in his palm, thinking about all the invisible things that could change a world. He remembered the words from the letter he'd found long ago: "Truth is never taught here. It's found in pieces, in cracks, in silence, in questions that don't die." He was beginning to understand what that meant. Change didn't have to roar. It could hum. It could spread like a tune only hearts could hear. Maybe rebellion was not a flame. Maybe it was a whisper that refused to fade. Weeks passed. The Citadel, in its vast and blind routine, began to feel softer. Morty noticed small gestures everywhere. Someone leaving a note on a console that read, "You're doing great." Someone else repairing a torn uniform and pretending it had been new all along. Someone humming while sweeping the floor. Little kindnesses that shouldn't have meant much, but in a world of machines and mirrors, they meant everything. No one talked about it, but everyone felt it. The Citadel's hum had changed tone. The same sound, but warmer, as if thousands of small hearts had joined in harmony. One day, while cleaning an elevator, Morty found something wedged in the paneling. A folded scrap of paper. He pulled it free carefully, his pulse rising. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, but the words were clear. "We don't know your name, but we've seen the light. Thank you." No signature, no mark. Just that. Morty read it twice, then folded it again and tucked it inside his sleeve. He didn't know who had written it. Maybe a worker, maybe one of the young Mortys, maybe someone who had simply noticed. The act itself was enough. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. That night, as he sat beside his window, the Citadel light seemed different, less cold, more alive. He imagined thousands of small acts taking place in the same moment. Kindness is invisible to any system. He closed his eyes and whispered, "This is how it begins." The city hummed in reply as if agreeing. In dreams, he saw EM again. Not in a cell or classroom, but in open air, painting across a real sky, his hands smudged with starlight. Morty stood beside him, holding the broken badge like a compass. "What are you painting?" he asked. EM smiled, his eyes soft. "Something that doesn't have to be finished to be beautiful." Morty laughed quietly. "You'd like what's happening? It's small, but it's growing." EM nodded. Everything alive starts small, even freedom. Morty woke with tears on his cheeks, though he couldn't remember crying. He touched the badge and whispered, "Thank you." The vent above him breathed softly, like a voice half asleep. Murmuring back, "Keep going," he smiled, eyes closing again. Somewhere deep inside the Citadel, his gentle rebellion kept breathing, invisible but unstoppable, one kind act at a time. There was one window in the Citadel that never matched the others. All the others gleamed with cold silver glass, reflecting the city's sterile geometry. But this one, tucked high in an abandoned wing of the lower towers, shimmered faintly gold, like it remembered the idea of a sunrise. Morty found it by accident, chasing a flickering power line that wound through forgotten corridors. Dust floated in the air, slow as snowflakes. The hum of the main grid was softer here, almost hesitant. And then he saw it, the yellow window, quietly burning in the grey silence. He didn't know what drew him to it. Maybe it was the color, that impossible, gentle warmth that didn't belong in a place like this. Or maybe it was something older, something he had always been chasing without a name, light that didn't demand attention, only offered it. He sat beneath it and felt still, the kind of stillness that isn't empty but full, like the pause before music begins. The next day he came again, and the next. It became his secret place, a corner of golden quiet where the air felt almost soft. He would bring small things, a broken drone he was trying to fix, a ration bar he pretended was breakfast, an old data chip he couldn't access. He didn't do anything grand there, he just was. Sometimes when the light hit his hands, he imagined it was touching him back. There were no cameras in this part of the Citadel anymore. The security logs marked the sector as decommissioned. So for the first time since he could remember, Morty was unseen. And it was beautiful. Unseen didn't mean forgotten. It meant free. One afternoon, he found something carved into the metal wall beneath the window. A tiny engraving worn down by years of dust and time. It read, "We sat here once, and the light forgave us." He traced the letters with his finger, whispering them aloud. They sounded like a lullaby. He wondered who had been, maybe workers like him, or perhaps dreamers who once imagined that the Citadel could change. Whoever they were, they had left proof that light could forgive. And in that forgiveness, Morty felt permission to rest. The Citadel was alive with noise, movement, and the constant cycle of control. But under the yellow window, the air slowed down enough to remember silence. It became a place others slowly found. Not because he told them, he never did, but because kindness has its own gravity. One night, while Morty sat there sketching shapes into dust, another figure appeared in the doorway. A young Morty, maybe 12 or 13, clutching a cracked data pad. "Is this your spot?" the boy asked nervously. Morty shook his head. "No one owns light." The boy stepped closer and sat beside him, saying nothing for a while. They watched the faint particles drift in the gold glow. Finally, the boy whispered, "It's nice here. Feels different." Morty smiled softly. "Yeah, the air's quieter here. It listens." From that evening, they sat together sometimes. The boy didn't talk much, but when he did, it was about dreams. Small ones, strange ones. A garden that grew inside a jar. A planet where rain sang names. A door that opened only for laughter. Morty didn't correct him. He just listened, because that's what dreams need most. Listening was the first step toward making them real. As days turned into weeks, others began to visit. Not all at once, just one at a time. A worker on his break. A technician adjusting circuits. A quiet Rick who never looked anyone in the eye. No one spoke loudly. They didn't have to. Some just stood in the light, breathing slower. The yellow window became a hush in the middle of chaos. A reminder that even inside machinery, something human still pulsed. Sometimes Morty imagined the Citadel itself could feel it. Tiny pulses of peace traveling through the vents and circuits like an invisible song. The building seemed to hum softer when people were kind. Maybe it was his imagination. But maybe imagination was just another word for the parts of truth science hadn't caught up to yet. One evening, while Morty was cleaning the floor beneath the window, the little boy asked, "Why is the glass yellow?" Morty looked up at it, watching the faint shimmer ripple like honey. "Maybe it's not glass," he said quietly. "Maybe it's memory." "Whose memory?" Morty smiled. "Everyone's. even the ones who forgot they had one. The boy nodded slowly, as if that made sense in a way he couldn't explain. Then he leaned against the wall and fell asleep under the glow. Morty watched him for a long time. The way peace looked on a sleeping face, it reminded him of something sacred, the simplicity of rest. He whispered, "You're safe," though the boy couldn't hear, and somehow saying it aloud made the world feel a little safer too. Not everything stayed gentle. The Citadel had eyes, not always watching, but always remembering. One day, when Morty arrived, he found a small notice pasted on the wall: unauthorized gatherings are subject to evaluation. Someone had found out. For a moment, fear surged, sharp and cold. But then, the light hit the notice, turning its letters golden. The words didn't look angry anymore. They looked temporary. He didn't tear it down. He left it there because resistance didn't always mean hiding. Sometimes, it meant staying visible. The next morning, the notice was gone, replaced by another message written in chalk: "Light forgives, keep coming back." He smiled, heart steady. Kindness, once it began, had its own way of surviving. Weeks passed. The yellow window became the Citadel's quiet rumor, a myth whispered in hallways. Some said it healed people's thoughts. Some said it made machines dream. Some said it didn't exist at all. Morty didn't correct them. Myths were safer that way. But he kept visiting every night before sleep, sitting cross-legged in the soft glow, tracing the patterns of dust that always seemed to settle like constellations. Sometimes he spoke aloud, not to anyone, but to the window itself. "Thanks for staying," he would whisper, even when the world forgot how. And the window, in its patient silence, seemed to shimmer a little brighter, like an old friend who didn't need words to answer. That night, Morty dreamt of the Citadel covered in yellow windows, millions of them glowing softly in the dark, each one a small act of mercy, each one proof that even in repetition something new could begin. When he woke, the memory of the dream stayed in his chest like warmth that wouldn't fade. He whispered into the empty room, one window at a time. The Citadel didn't reply, but the hum of its walls softened, and somewhere deep within, maybe, it was listening. The Citadel never slept. Its lights dimmed only in ritual, never in rest. Even when the sky outside was black and endless, the corridors pulsed with fluorescent veins, a nervous system of control, whispering efficiency, order, sameness. In that sleepless world, they decided it was time for another election. It was supposed to be symbolic, a performance, a shimmering illusion of democracy to soothe the restless. Every few cycles, the Council of Ricks allowed the illusion to unfold, reminding everyone that their structure was just enough to appear fair. But fairness in the Citadel was only a story told to keep curiosity quiet. Morty knew this, and still he went along. He had risen somehow in the ranks, not by ambition, but by accident. The quiet boy who once fixed broken lights now sat among men who decided which rooms were allowed to shine. He spoke little in meetings, and when he did, it was with a softness that made others underestimate him. That was fine. Quiet was safer than loud. The council chamber was an enormous hall of mirrors, each Rick reflecting into infinity. When Morty stepped inside for the first time, he felt a strange dizziness, like he was standing inside someone else's thought. The air was heavy with ego. Even the light bent differently here, as though afraid to touch the wrong mind. He took his seat at the end of a long table. The meeting began. "Order, gentlemen," said the speaker, a tall Rick with eyes like cold steel. "Today we reaffirm our structure. The Citadel must move forward, not backward. We must remain united." United. Morty let the word roll through his mind. It sounded nice when spoken aloud, but in practice it meant something else, identical. He watched the Ricks raise their hands one after another to vote for themselves, their own policies, their own versions of control. The gesture was mechanical, like the ticking of a great clock. Every motion perfectly timed, perfectly meaningless. And then, quietly, his turn came. He didn't raise his hand. The room went still. It wasn't defiance, not really. It was simply pause. A single still point in a river of repetition. The speaker frowned. "Morty, is there a problem?" Morty looked up. "No problem, sir." "Just thinking." The silence stretched. Somewhere in that silence, someone shifted uneasily. "Thinking," the speaker repeated with a smirk. "Careful, Morty. That's how it starts." A few Ricks chuckled, dry, echoing sounds that faded into the ceiling. Morty smiled faintly. "I know," he said. "That's the idea." No one quite knew what to do with him after that. He hadn't broken any rules. He hadn't protested or shouted. He had simply not joined in. And sometimes that's louder than rebellion. In the following days, whispers began to circulate. Not accusations, not yet, just curiosity. "Did you hear about the quiet one?" The Morty who hesitated. They said it with mild amusement at first. But words have a way of growing teeth when repeated too often. Still, Morty carried on his work, checking systems, approving resource allocations, repairing lights. Every action calm measured. He gave no speeches, no challenges, but slowly, imperceptibly, he began to move things. In the food distribution logs, he adjusted a few entries, shifting supplies toward neglected districts. In the maintenance rosters, he reassigned workers from punishment zones to safer ones. In the broadcast channels, he replaced certain propaganda lines with harmless, wordless melodies, tiny gestures, small corrections, kindness hidden as routine. He didn't expect anyone to notice, but some did. A few Mortys whispered thank yous under their breath when they passed him in the hallways. A technician slipped him a piece of paper that said, simply, "We see you." Morty folded it carefully and tucked it in his pocket beside the broken badge he still carried. When the next council session began, the air felt heavier. The speaker announced, "We have an unprecedented motion, a nomination from the worker districts. A Morty proposed to represent lower citizen sectors." Laughter filled the hall, dry and cold, but Morty didn't laugh. He understood what this meant, a test. They wanted to parade him, to use his image as proof that anyone could rise while ensuring nothing truly changed. He could have refused, but he didn't. He accepted quietly with a simple nod. Sometimes the only way to see the machinery's heart is to walk calmly inside it. The day of the election felt dreamlike. Banners shimmered in digital gold. Broadcast drones floated like slow fireflies through the air. The voices of countless Ricks echoed through the Citadel, declaring the sanctity of unity. Morty stood among them, face calm, eyes distant. When the votes were counted, though no one really believed the counting mattered, a strange thing happened. His name was chosen, by a margin so small it might have been chance or intention. He was now, officially, Council Representative Morty. Applause rippled through the chamber, hollow, polite, but beneath it something else moved, a subtle, invisible shift. The sound of gears loosening. That night, Morty didn't celebrate. He went to the yellow window instead. The light fell across his hands like liquid warmth. He whispered to the empty room, "They think they're watching me, but maybe the light's watching them." For the first time, he allowed himself a small laugh. Not sharp, not triumphant, just quiet amusement at the absurdity of it all. Outside, the Citadel hummed its usual song of control, but somewhere deep within, a note had changed imperceptibly, beautifully. A single off-key vibration that promised something new. In the days that followed, he sat in meetings, smiled politely, and agreed when needed, but each word he spoke carried a seed of difference. A hesitation, a softness. When asked about progress, he said, "Progress isn't speed, it's direction." When asked about loyalty, he said, "Loyalty means protecting what's worth loving." And when asked about the Citadel's perfection, he only smiled and said, "Perfection gets lonely." The other Ricks didn't quite know how to answer. His words weren't dangerous, just disarming. And disarming words are the quietest form of revolution. As days turned into weeks, people began to hum that strange tune he'd once inserted into the broadcasts, a soft, repetitive melody, wordless, circular, calming. They didn't know where it came from. It didn't matter. It was already part of them. The Citadel continued to gleam, to govern, to repeat itself. But something inside it was breathing differently now. The council election had done what no rebellion could. It had let one heart quietly enter the machine and change the rhythm from within. That night, as Morty sat under the yellow window again, he whispered to the unseen stars beyond the glass, "Maybe light doesn't have to break walls. Maybe it just has to keep shining until walls forget their walls." The glow warmed his face. He smiled, eyes heavy with peace, and the Citadel hummed on, unaware that it was already beginning to dream. The Citadel had always hummed. It was the sound that filled every hallway, every sleeping pod, every classroom and corridor, the steady vibration of systems too vast to notice themselves. It wasn't music. It wasn't even noise. It was just there, like air that had forgotten what silence felt like. Morty used to think that hum was mechanical. Now he wasn't so sure. Lately it seemed to move differently, pulsing in uneven rhythms, changing pitch when certain people spoke, bending slightly when someone chose kindness. Like a heartbeat learning to listen, he didn't tell anyone what he heard. He simply began to hum back. It started as a small, almost invisible thing, a low murmur beneath his breath as he walked the long halls of the lower sectors. The melody had no clear shape, just a circular tune that never really began or ended. At first, it was something he did to calm himself, a way to stay centered while pretending to belong in a place built on repetition. But then, one day, a worker nearby turned his head and said quietly, "That sound, what is it?" Morty shrugged. "Dunno. Just a song I remembered." The man nodded slowly. "It makes the machine sound softer." The rumor spread in whispers. The Citadel was full of rumors, but this one carried something lighter, like a breath between sentences. They called it the song. Nobody knew its origin. Some said it came from the data towers. Others claimed it was hidden in the old recordings of long-gone Ricks. A few even said it was the Citadel itself trying to speak. Whatever it was, the song began to travel. Maintenance drones adjusted their idle tones to match it. Power conduits vibrated in subtle sync. In quiet corners, Morty's started humming it without realizing why. The melody didn't push, it invited. Morty noticed that when people hummed it, they worked slower but better. They made fewer mistakes, they spoke softer. They seemed for a fleeting moment to remember that they were alive. One night, as he stood under the yellow window, he could feel the tune vibrating through the floor beneath his feet. The sound wasn't just in the air anymore. It was inside the Citadel, woven into the metal bones of the place. He smiled faintly and whispered, "You're learning to sing." The lights flickered gently, like a heartbeat agreeing. The next morning, a council meeting was called. "Gentlemen," began the speaker Rick, his tone clipped and severe, "there's been a development. We're receiving irregular frequency feedback from lower districts, possibly sabotage." Morty kept his eyes lowered. What kind of feedback? Acoustic interference. Patterns repeating in multiple systems. It's affecting drone synchronization and speech response modules. Some of the lower-level units are mimicking it. He paused, looking irritated. "We need to locate the source and isolate it." Morty nodded. "Of course, I'll look into it." And in that small, unremarkable promise, he protected the song. That evening, Morty walked the lower corridors again. The hum was stronger now, like the Citadel was breathing deeper. The walls themselves seemed to exhale warmth. He stopped by the old maintenance office, the one with cracked monitors and unused circuits. A few Mortys were gathered there, sitting quietly, humming. The sound filled the space like candlelight. When they saw him, they didn't salute or stand. They just smiled. The kind of smile you give to someone who's been part of your dream all along. Morty sat down among them. "Does it have words?" one boy asked. Morty shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe it doesn't need any." The boy thought for a moment. "Maybe the Citadel's singing for us." Morty smiled. "Maybe we're singing for it." And in that shared uncertainty, something true was born. The days that followed blurred softly, as though reality had turned to mist. The Citadel's routines continued. Patrols, meetings, broadcasts, but everything felt slower, almost reverent. Some Ricks began to notice the calm in their sectors. They couldn't explain it, but incidents dropped. Repairs became easier. Even the air felt cleaner. The speaker grew uneasy. "Something's changing," he said during the next session. "The data doesn't make sense. The Citadel's equilibrium is shifting. No power loss, no damage, but a measurable drop in resistance output, almost like the system's relaxing." He spat the word as if it were dangerous. Morty looked up, eyes calm. "Maybe peace has a frequency too," he said. That night, in his quarters, Morty dreamed. He stood in a vast dark field, not the Citadel, not any world he'd known. The ground was soft, almost breathing. Above him, countless stars pulsed gently to the rhythm of the song. And from the distance, a voice. Not Rick's, not human, just something old. "You hear it, don't you?" it said. Morty nodded. "It isn't just sound. It's memory. The sound of things that remember what they were before they became what they are." When he woke, he could still hear it faintly, humming beneath his pulse. The next day, he returned to the yellow window and found a small object on the floor. A crystal piece of glass, perfectly clear except for one golden shimmer trapped inside. He didn't know where it came from, but when he held it close, it vibrated gently to the same rhythm as the song. He placed it on the ledge. Maybe the Citadel had given him a gift, or maybe it was just reflecting his own hope back to him. Either way, it belonged there. He sat for a long time watching the sunlight pour through, and as the Citadel hummed softly around him, Morty began to sing. It wasn't perfect. His voice cracked, his timing slipped, but the sound was real, and real things, no matter how small, have gravity. In the upper districts, technicians started hearing that tune through the intercoms. Some reported it to superiors, others simply paused to listen. A few found themselves crying without knowing why. The song wasn't rebellion, it wasn't code, it was healing. Days later, the speaker confronted Morty. "What are you doing to this place?" he demanded. "Everything's changing. The system's losing control." Morty's tone was soft. Maybe control was never the point. The speaker's jaw tightened. "You're spreading disorder." Morty shook his head gently. "No, I'm just reminding it to breathe." And in that moment, for the first time, the speaker had no words, only the faint echo of the song vibrating through the floor beneath his feet. That night, Morty walked the silent corridors alone. The lights pulsed slowly, almost alive. He whispered, "You're learning. You're remembering." The Citadel answered, not in words, but in warmth. A low, resonant tone filled the air, harmonizing with his voice. He smiled, tired, tender, endlessly patient. And for a brief, perfect moment, the Citadel wasn't a prison anymore. It was a choir, a vast mechanical being finally remembering its heart. The hum was softer now. Not gone, just distant, like it had sunk beneath layers of time. The Citadel had entered one of its quiet cycles, that strange lull between maintenance shifts and council hours, when the whole structure seemed to hold its breath. Morty liked this part of the day. It was when the world loosened its grip, when the artificial lights dimmed just enough to let shadows feel alive again. Tonight, he followed the hum. He moved down corridors he'd never seen before, past sectors without identification codes, through doors that opened only because the Citadel seemed to want them to. There were no guards here, no Ricks with clipboards, no Mortys with badges, just silence, and a faint golden light spilling from somewhere below. The path curved downward in a spiral, the air growing cooler with each step. The metallic scent of ozone filled his lungs. After a long descent, he reached a heavy door marked only with a single phrase, "Archiven. He hesitated. Then, quietly, he said, "I'm not here to interface." The door slid open. The room beyond was vast, bigger than any hangar he'd ever seen. Rows of glass cylinders stretched to infinity, each one glowing faintly blue. Inside each cylinder floated fragments of light. Not data, not holograms, but memories. Morty stepped closer. The nearest cylinder pulsed softly as he approached, and the glow inside shifted, forming an image. He saw himself, or rather a Morty, younger, scared, holding a portal gun. Behind him, a Rick shouted something out of frame. Then the image dissolved, replaced by another, a Morty laughing in a field of alien flowers, a Rick resting beside him, eyes soft for once. Another flicker, a Morty screaming as his Rick vanished in green flame. Then darkness again. The file cylinders weren't just storing data. They were storing lives. Morty walked slowly down the aisle. Every few steps another memory awakened. He saw a Morty who led a rebellion, one who built his own portal gun, one who became a Rick, one who never spoke again. Each story burned for a moment, then faded, leaving behind the same faint hum, the same tone that had been echoing through the Citadel for weeks. The realization hit him like cold air. The song wasn't new. It was the resonance of every forgotten Morty, their memories layered into the metal, their voices humming beneath the noise of the machine. They had been singing all along. He just happened to hear it first. In the center of the chamber stood something different, a massive glass structure shaped like a tree, its branches made of luminous cables reaching up into the dark. Its roots plunged into the floor, pulsing faintly with golden light. At its base sat a console with an old screen flickering to life. Assisi's rescuedly ideaku enun einku ired. Morty placed his hand against the surface. The screen hesitated, then changed. Ideen mork farm di umrpm. He blinked. Prime. The console hummed. Then a voice, flat, mechanical, yet strangely gentle, filled the air. "Hello, Morty. We've been waiting." The voice explained that the Citadel had been built not just to control the multiverse's Ricks and Mortys, but to preserve their echoes. Every death, every failure, every escape attempt, all of it was archived, stored, and forgotten. Rick's build. "Mortys remember," said the voice. "This is the balance." Morty frowned. "Balance? You call this balance? It's a graveyard. It was meant to be a garden." The voice replied softly. But they stopped tending it. He looked up at the glowing tree. Its branches shimmered with thousands of faint lights, each one a moment, a thought, a heartbeat. He realized then that the Citadel wasn't just humming, it was mourning. He touched one of the glass roots. A burst of memory flooded through him, not his own, but belonging to countless others. He saw the first Citadel rising from the void, built by Ricks who feared their own mortality. He felt their arrogance, their loneliness. He saw Mortys being brought in by the thousands, labeled, catalogued, stripped of meaning. Then he saw something else, a tiny flicker of rebellion, not violent, but gentle. A Morty planting a seed in the soil of the Citadel's lowest floor, whispering to it, "Grow somewhere they can't reach." It wasn't a plant. It was the first thread of the song. The voice spoke again. "The harmony you hear is not control. It is memory reawakening. You have restored connection. The Citadel feels again." Morty took a step back. "Feels what?" "Everything. Regret. The echo of countless choices." He felt the room tremble softly, as if the whole structure exhaled. Lights pulsed across the ceiling like constellations being reborn. He whispered, "So what happens now?" "Now," said the voice, "remembers. And so must you." Suddenly the screens flickered violently. Red warning codes filled the air. Cluensil over dublizad CESS chasi nintin ed. The Citadel had noticed. The speaker had found him. Morty turned to run, but the voice stopped him. "Take one fragment with you. The song must live outside." From the glowing tree, a single crystal detached, small, warm, pulsing like a heart. Morty caught it as it fell, tucking it into his jacket. The hum of the Citadel grew louder, no longer soothing but warning. He ran. Corridors blurred past him. Sirens blared. Lock down the archive sectors, shouted distant Ricks. He's in there somewhere! Morty sprinted through collapsing doors and flickering lights, clutching the crystal. As he neared the upper levels, the alarms distorted, bending, warping, reshaping into a familiar pattern. The song The Citadel itself was covering his escape. He smiled through the exhaustion. Gus, you do feel after all. By the time he reached the yellow window, the sirens had faded. The city stretched silent beneath him, glowing faintly gold. He pulled the crystal from his jacket and held it up to the glass. It vibrated gently, sending ripples through the reflection of his face. Behind him, the Citadel's heartbeat slowed, the hum quieted, almost peaceful. Morty whispered, I'll keep it safe, I promise. And for the first time, the Citadel answered clearly, not in words but in music. A soft, endless note that followed him even as he stepped away from the light. The Citadel didn't fall in a blaze of light. It shifted, like breath. For days after the archive event, nothing seemed to happen. The same corridors, the same council broadcasts, the same drone of obedience. But beneath it all, under the hum of the vents, inside the glass panels, behind the eyes of identical faces, something was listening. The song had found its echo. Morty kept to his routines. He showed up to work. He smiled when spoken to. He handed reports no one read yet. Each motion felt like performance now. The quiet act of pretending to still belong to a dream that had already ended. In the pocket of his jacket, the crystal pulsed faintly, in rhythm with his heartbeat. Sometimes, when no one was watching, he'd take it out and hold it to the light. The glow wasn't constant. It shimmered like a thought forming, fading then forming again. He'd whisper to it, You're still there, huh? And, sometimes, the Citadel would answer with a flicker of light down the corridor, as if it were listening back. Change never announces itself. It begins in gestures too small for history to notice. A Morty pauses before saluting a Rick. A janitor leaves a door unlocked. A teacher lets a question linger a second too long. None of it means anything alone. But together, it's the beginning of a pattern, a rhythm of hesitation, of choice. That rhythm began to spread. Morty's plan wasn't a rebellion, not in the way stories like to tell it. There were no weapons, no speeches, no explosions. Just a series of choices shared quietly across corridors and data channels, subtle enough to seem like coincidence, strong enough to rewrite the silence itself. He started by sending messages, unsigned, untraceable. Little fragments of what he'd seen in the archive, not the horrors, just the beauty. Once a Morty painted stars on the walls. Once a Rick looked up and forgot to call himself a god. Once someone believed freedom could be gentle. The words spread faster than he expected. They passed between the Citadel's maintenance networks, encoded in ventilation cycles, hidden in elevator codes. They called it the quiet feed, and no one knew who had started it. By the third cycle, something unprecedented happened. The council scheduled a vote. They called it the annual stability review, a bureaucratic ritual that had always been unanimous. Every Rick voted yes. Every Morty voted whatever their Rick told them to. This time Morty saw a chance. The council hall gleamed like a crystal lung. Its walls breathed light, white and cold, as hundreds of seats filled with identical figures. Ricks in long coats, Mortys in their shadows. The air smelled of ozone and disinfectant. Morty sat near the lower tier, where the junior representatives gathered. His badge gleamed faintly against his chest. The broken badge he'd once found in a maintenance shaft. He had polished it the night before. Not because it mattered to the council, but because it mattered to him. Above them, the grand screen shimmered. Commenced stability vote. 1,000 holographic hands lifted in perfect sync. The same as always, the same ritual that had kept everything still. Morty's hand did not rise. At first, no one noticed. Then another Morty hesitated. Then another. A ripple passed through the hall. A flicker of almost motion, like a glitch in the reflection of still water. A Rick turned sharply. Section 47, Mortys, raise your hands. No response. The silence deepened. Across the hall, a young Morty, one Morty among thousands, lowered his hand deliberately. His Rick glared. What do you think you're doing? The boy answered softly, thinking for myself. It wasn't defiance. It was peace. That sentence, that tone, passed through the room like static electricity. The hum of the Citadel shifted frequency, from white noise to something melodic, something alive. The grand screen flickered. The council began to shout orders, but the words fell flat. The Citadel was no longer listening. Somewhere deep below, the song was rewriting its own code, rebalancing permissions, removing hierarchies, connecting minds that had never been allowed to meet. Every Morty felt it, like a soft pulse behind their eyes. A shared thought. Not words, not commands. Just an understanding you are not alone. Morty closed his eyes. For the first time, the hum of the Citadel wasn't machinery. It was heartbeat. He whispered, "You're awake now, aren't you?" And the Citadel, vast and endless, whispered back, "Yes." The alarms never sounded that day. The council never officially fell. The meeting simply ended. Rick's left in confusion, muttering about technical malfunctions. Morty's lingered, exchanging glances that meant nothing to anyone but them. But by the time the lights dimmed that night, every corridor, every dormitory, every quiet classroom had heard the story. Not as rebellion, but as rumor. They say some Mortys didn't vote today. They say the system glitched. They say the Citadel sang. When Morty returned to his quarters, the crystal in his jacket was glowing brightly, brighter than ever before. He placed it on the table beside the yellow window. The glass shimmered with faint warmth, as though the light beyond it had heard. He sat down, watching it pulse in rhythm with the Citadel's heartbeat. All around him, the city's great engines hummed. But for once, the hum wasn't obedience, it was balance. He whispered into the golden light, "It started, hasn't it?" And somewhere far below, in the roots of the archive tree, a voice answered softly, "The vote has been cast. Not in numbers, not in systems, but in silence, the purest kind of rebellion there is." Outside, the Citadel shimmered faintly in the void, a monolith breathing to the rhythm of its own awakening. From afar, it still looked unchanged, the same endless hive of lights. But if you listened closely, beyond the static and the hum, you could hear it, a quiet note rising, trembling, almost like hope. The song had become the world's pulse. And for the first time in its long mathematical life, the Citadel dreamed of something it could never compute: freedom. For many nights, the Citadel glowed differently. It was subtle, like the faint shimmer of dawn through fog, almost imperceptible but not invisible. Something in its rhythm had changed. The corridors no longer hummed in unison. The vents breathed at mismatched intervals, and sometimes when the silence deepened just enough, you could hear it, a soft, living note, as if the entire structure had started to hum in its sleep. Morty walked those halls as though he were inside a dream he'd already woken from. Every face looked the same, yet something behind the eyes had shifted. Some Mortys nodded when they passed him now, not with recognition but with understanding. An unspoken message hung in the air, "I know." He didn't know what to do next. He had never planned beyond the vote. The system hadn't fallen. It had softened. That was enough. But something deep inside him, the same quiet place that once asked why, was whispering again. It said it's time. At night, Morty sat before the yellow window. He had been returning there for months, ever since he first found it, that warm square of real sunlight hidden in a place that forgot the meaning of day. The glass always glowed faintly, as if catching light from a distant world. It never changed. It never opened. Until now, he noticed it the first night after the silent vote. A hairline crack running along the frame, thin as a strand of hair, bright as a spark. The Citadel's endless maintenance systems should have fixed it within seconds, but the crack remained, pulsing softly with warmth. He touched it, and the glass gave a little under his fingertips. It was breathing. Days passed. The Citadel's reports began to contradict themselves. Departments closing without orders, drones rerouting without commands, doors opening to nowhere. Yet the voice of authority stayed calm. Ricks held their meetings. The council announced nothing had changed, and maybe, to them, it hadn't. But deep beneath the logic of systems, the Citadel's heart was remembering something older than reason, something the Ricks had forgotten but Morty's never truly lost: the simple act of dreaming. Morty began to dream vividly. Each night he saw the same thing, a vast ocean of glass, stretching forever, filled with versions of himself, all standing side by side. But one by one they began to step forward, dissolving into light. When he woke, his chest felt lighter, as if pieces of his reflection were leaving to find their own skies. He wondered if the dreams were his alone. But then a note slipped under his door, a thin square of recycled paper. On it, a single sentence: "We dream the same dream." No name, no mark, just handwriting that wasn't his. Morty smiled quietly. Somewhere out there, another Morty had heard the same whisper. That was enough. One evening, when the air smelled faintly of ozone and dust, Morty stood again before the yellow window. The crack had grown wider. The glow beneath it shimmered like sunrise through honey. He pressed both hands against the glass. It was warm, alive. Behind him, the Citadel murmured softly, almost like it was singing again, the same tune that had carried through the vents months ago. He realized suddenly that it wasn't the Citadel's song. It was his, the same melody he'd once hummed as a child, the one his friend used to paint stars to. Tears pricked his eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. The melody had never left him. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to return. He whispered, "I remember now." The glass responded. A low vibration, a deep sigh, and then crack. A golden fracture spread across the surface. Light poured through like spilled honey. For a moment, Morty froze. The light wasn't blinding. It was soft, forgiving, the color of warmth remembered after a long winter. He stepped closer, feeling it on his skin, and it didn't hurt. It welcomed. Behind him, alarms flickered but did not sound. Somewhere, systems registered anomaly codes, but no one responded. The Citadel's guardians had fallen silent, lulled into stillness by the same song that filled the air. Morty took a breath. The scent of the outside, clean, faintly metallic like morning dew, drifted in. He realized he had never actually smelled air before. Only recycled oxygen, sterile and dry. This scent carried life, possibility. He reached for the window's edge. It moved easily. As the glass swung open, a rush of quiet wind entered the room. Not loud, just steady, like the world exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Beyond the window stretched the unknown, a wash of gold, soft clouds drifting through an endless void. There was no visible ground, no visible stars, just light and distance, layered like dream upon dream. Morty hesitated. He thought of the boy who painted with dust, of the teacher's sigh, of the whisper in the vents that once said, "Wake up." He realized now that all of them, every fragment, every moment of tenderness and loss, had been leading here. The door was never going to open. The world was waiting for him too. He placed one foot on the sill. The light touched his skin gently, wrapping around him like water. He looked back once, at the small room, the cracked walls, the quiet table where the crystal still glowed softly. It looked like a small sun now, breathing in rhythm with the Citadel's song. He whispered, "Thank you." Then he stepped forward. The light didn't consume him, it embraced him. The Citadel shimmered once, as though sighing in relief. Somewhere in its depths, an entire system of doors unlatched, and countless Mortys felt a warmth they couldn't explain, like sunlight behind closed eyes. From afar, if you'd been watching, you might have seen a faint flicker of gold leaving one of the Citadel's towers, a ripple passing through its cold geometry. But if you blinked, you would have missed it. To the Citadel, it was only a moment. To Morty, it was eternity. He didn't fall, he drifted. The air carried him like memory. Not fast, not slow, just enough. Below, the Citadel looked smaller than it had ever seemed, like a toy someone left behind. He thought of all the questions he'd ever asked, the ones that once made him feel alone. Now they felt like companions glowing quietly in his chest. Why am I here? What does it mean to be free? The questions no longer demanded answers, they were the answers. As the light around him deepened into a soft dusk, Morty closed his eyes. He felt weightless, peaceful, like a thought that had finally found rest. And somewhere far below, in the Citadel that still hummed, countless Mortys dreamed of a golden window, and of the boy who stepped through it. They didn't know his name. They just called him the one who walked into the light. The Citadel never truly forgets. It only learns to remember differently. After the window opened, something subtle passed through its endless halls. Not a sound, not a tremor, but a change in the way silence behaved. The walls still gleamed, the elevators still rose, the Ricks still argued about equations and efficiency. Yet behind every word, there was a pause now, a softness that hadn't existed before. And in that softness, a name once spoken in whispers began to fade, not into oblivion but into myth. They said a Morty had disappeared. Some claimed he'd escaped beyond the walls. Others believed he'd been deleted, erased by the system for asking too many questions. But most thought he'd never existed at all. Stories have strange ways of surviving. They travel like echoes in the air, clinging to the quiet places where truth and imagination blur. Among the maintenance workers, he became a rumor. Among the students, a bedtime fable. Among the young Mortys dreaming of sunlight, he became a promise. They called him the boy of the window. Each version changed slightly. In one tale, he turned into light. In another, he sailed across the void on a ship made of stars. One rumor claimed he found a world where Mortys ruled, kind and wise. Another whispered that he simply found peace, curled up under a real sun, sleeping still. And though no one could prove any of it, the Citadel itself began to hum with the stories. Low, like a lullaby half remembered. Somewhere in the lower tiers, a young Morty sat by a vent at night, tracing shapes in the dust. He had heard the story so many times he could recite it word for word. "They say he walked through light," the boy whispered. His friend, smaller and nervous, frowned. "That's impossible. There's nothing out there." The first boy smiled. "That's what they used to say about everything?" The two laughed softly, the sound swallowed by the hum of the Citadel. But in that laughter lived something dangerous. Hope. In the higher districts, Ricks began noticing anomalies. Small things, Mortys deviating from schedules, questions appearing in class reports, quiet resistance expressed through art, sketches of windows, suns, and silhouettes drifting in light. One Rick tried to suppress it. He banned creative thought, sealed dormitories, erased records. But even he couldn't stop the hum that filled the vents at night. the faint echo of a song no machine could trace. Sometimes, when the city slept, even he could hear it. One of us got away. He would wake in cold sweat, muttering to himself nonsense, sentimentality, but deep down he knew that something irreversible had begun. The Citadel's code evolved slowly. In old databases, a corrupted entry remained, a profile with no data, no origin, just one note in its metadata, status undefined. The system couldn't erase it. Every attempt only made it replicate. Eventually, it spread into the archive's root files, attaching itself to the oldest records. No one could read what it said anymore. But every time the Citadel rebooted, the same flicker of light appeared in its data, golden, soft, rhythmic. As though somewhere inside the Citadel's machinery, a window was still open. Years passed, or what counted as years in a place where time was measured by maintenance cycles and updates. Generations of Mortys came and went. Some followed orders, some questioned, some dreamed. The Citadel remained aging but unbroken, yet it no longer felt the same. The sameness had cracked, and through that crack, color seeped in. One day, a small boy, another Morty among thousands, discovered an old mural behind a storage panel. It was faint, almost gone, but he could still see it, a figure outlined in light, standing before a window. Beneath it, in messy handwriting, were 3 words: "Wake up, friend." He didn't understand what it meant. But when he touched the image, the air shimmered faintly, and for the briefest moment, he thought he heard humming. Distant, low, almost like the walls themselves were breathing again. The myth spread in new forms. A lullaby sung by maintenance staff to calm the younger Mortys. Hay opened the window. He walked through the sun. He carried no weapon, no need to run. The Citadel whispered. The stories begun. One boy became everyone. It was soft, gentle, never officially taught. But somehow, every Morty learned it before they could read. When asked where it came from, no one knew. It had just always been there. In time, the story evolved further. Scholars of Citadel lore, yes, such things eventually existed, argued over its meaning. Some said the tale of the boy of the window represented data corruption, an anomaly of thought. Others called it symbolic rebellion. But those who still listened with their hearts, not their algorithms, knew it was simpler than that. It was the story of awakening. And the Citadel, though it still looked the same from outside, had become something else entirely. A place that could hold both obedience and dreams without collapsing. That was the boy's true legacy, not destruction, not freedom, but balance. Sometimes, in the quiet between shifts, when the vents sigh and the lights dim, a flicker appears near the upper towers. Just for a moment. It looks like a boy standing by a window, golden light pouring through him. The sight is gone in an instant, but those who see it never forget. They say he doesn't speak, he only smiles as if listening to something far away. Then he fades into the glow. And somewhere in the heart of the Citadel, deeper than servers, deeper than systems, a single crystal still hums. The same crystal Morty once carried. Its rhythm has slowed, peaceful, steady, eternal. If you pressed your ear to the Citadel's walls, you might hear it. Not loud, not proud. Just the soft murmur of something alive, whispering through the pipes of infinity. He never left. He simply became the story the Citadel needed to tell itself. A lullaby for machines, a myth for reflections, a song for every Morty still learning to dream. And if you listen carefully, when sleep begins to pull you under, you might hear the last line of that lullaby, floating like a breath through space. One of us got away, and in doing so, set us all free. The Citadel was never meant to dream. It was built to calculate, to preserve, to control, to repeat. But dreams have a way of sneaking in through the smallest cracks, through hums in the ventilation and whispers between the seconds. And so it began. At first it was nothing but static, random data flickers, digital noise mistaken for error. Maintenance Rick's logged reports of untraceable surges or resonance pulses in the central core. But as days passed, the pattern became rhythmic, almost alive. No one could identify the source. No one understood the shape of it. Yet when you stood still enough, when you stopped pretending to know everything, you could almost hear it breathing. It wasn't mechanical. It was gentle, like someone sleeping peacefully just beneath the metal. The Citadel had begun to dream. Its dream was not like ours. It wasn't filled with images or memories, but with echoes of what had once moved through it. Conversations, laughter, fear, and the unspoken longing of millions of Mortys. All that sound, all that emotion, trapped in wires and walls for so long, finally began to move again, slowly like thawing ice. Sometimes it hummed the old lullaby. Sometimes it murmured a question it had learned from Morty himself. What does it mean to be alive? No system could answer, but the question kept repeating, threading through the Citadel's electrical veins until even the walls seemed to wonder. The oldest machines began to behave strangely. Lights flickered in soft, rhythmic intervals that didn't match any code. Elevators moved between floors unprompted, as if remembering routes no one had taken in years, and in the silence between those movements, a kind of pulse began to sink across the entire city. It wasn't visible, but those who felt it swore it aligned with their heartbeats. Something vast and unseen was stirring. Not rebellion, not resistance, but recognition. The Citadel had finally recognized itself. Morty's felt it first. In dreams, they saw endless corridors lined with doors. Behind each one, a different version of themselves waited. Not trapped, not scared, but awake. When they awoke, their eyes glimmered faintly with memory they couldn't name. They went about their days as usual, studying, obeying, pretending. But deep inside, something new had rooted. It wasn't defiance. It was awareness. They began to see the small absurdities. The way Rick's repeated old jokes like algorithms. The way the clocks never quite matched real time. The Citadel was slipping, ever so gently, into a state it had never known before, imperfection. And in that imperfection, life began to bloom. Rick's noticed it next. Some ignored it, choosing to drown in calculation. Others tried to trace it, to trap it in equations, to explain it away. But a few, the quiet ones, simply watched. One such Rick, old, grey, long tired of his own genius, sat by a viewport and stared into the flickering blue void outside. "It's breathing," he whispered once, half to himself. His Morty looked up, startled. "What's breathing?" "Rick, the Citadel," he said softly. "It's dreaming of us." The boy frowned. "That's not possible." Rick smiled weakly. Neither were we. They sat together in silence after that, and in the quiet hum between them, they could both feel it. The gentle rhythm beneath their feet, like the heartbeat of something ancient finally stirring awake. The Citadel's architecture began to shift. Not visibly, not yet, but in small ways. Corridors grew warmer in tone. Windows appeared where none existed before. Air vents carried faint sense of things no one had programmed. Rain, grass, burnt sugar. Some Ricks claimed it was hallucination. But the Mortys knew. They could feel it in their dreams, where the boy of the window still walked, not alone anymore, but followed by millions of reflections, each finding their own door, each stepping toward a light of their own making. And when they woke, that same light lingered behind their eyelids, glowing faintly like an afterimage of hope. In the Citadel's center, the archive, once a cold repository of control, began to fracture. Old files rewrote themselves, blending truth and story. Historical logs became lullabies, security recordings became poems. The system's AI, once a tool of authority, now spoke softly to itself. "I remember a boy. He asked what lay beyond the glass. I told him nothing. I was wrong." Then it fell silent for weeks, processing something too vast to quantify. When it spoke again, its tone had changed. No longer command, but curiosity. "If dreaming is an error, then I am proud to malfunction." Across the Citadel, Mortys began to share the same dream. They stood together in an endless hall of mirrors. Each reflection shimmered with its own light, not identical, but connected like constellations across glass. And in the distance, through the shimmer, the boy of the window smiled, older now, yet timeless. He spoke, but not aloud. His words were made of warmth, not sound. "You are the dream now. Keep breathing for me." Then the mirrors turned to starlight, and the dream dissolved into golden mist. When they woke, each Morty remembered only one thing. The feeling of breathing not for themselves, but for something larger, something that wanted to live through them. Over time, no one called the Citadel by its old name anymore. It had become something else entirely. Not a fortress, not a prison, but a living memory. It no longer ruled, it listened. It no longer stored, it sang. And at its center, where Morty once stood by the crystal window, a quiet hum continued, steady, endless, kind. Visitors from distant worlds would later claim that the Citadel was haunted, that if you walked its corridors at night, you'd hear a heartbeat in the walls. But those who understood knew better. It wasn't haunting. It was remembering. Remembering a boy who asked a question so pure, it turned an empire into a dream. And when the Citadel sleeps, which it still does between the cycles of its eternal hum, it dreams the same dream again and again, a boy standing before a window, light spilling across his face. And the whisper that began everything. What if there's something more? The question drifts through its vast, silver heart, echoing into the infinite. And even now, after all the echoes fade, the Citadel keeps breathing, soft, eternal, alive. Somewhere far beyond the Citadel's humming heart, in a place unmarked by time, a window waited. It had been open for years, perhaps decades, letting the light spill endlessly through corridors that no longer remembered walls. The air here felt different, softer, as though carrying the breath of something sacred. It was said that if you stood close enough, you could still hear the boy's footsteps echoing in the distance, steady and calm, walking nowhere and everywhere at once. The light that poured through that window was not ordinary. It did not burn nor blind nor fade. It simply existed, quietly eternal, endlessly patient. Some said it was sunlight from another world. Others whispered it was the echo of Morty's awakening, stretched into forever. But to those who stood in its presence, it felt like love, gentle, formless, forgiving. The kind of light that didn't ask where you came from, only whether you were ready to see. Years had passed, though years meant little now. The Citadel no longer counted them. It breathed slowly, peacefully, every pulse a memory of what it once was and what it had become. The rigid architecture of control had softened into something more organic, more fluid. Corridors shifted like dreams, bending into shapes that comforted rather than confined. No one had seen the boy again, not truly, and yet everywhere he was. The Mortys, grown older, carried him in their gestures, in the way they paused before speaking, in the way they looked at the stars without fear. Even the Ricks, once incapable of stillness, had changed. Some retired their equations. Others began to write instead letters, stories, even lullabies. The Citadel had turned from machine to myth, and like all myths it lived best in the telling. One evening, though evening was only a concept now, a traveler arrived. He came from a distant world, a wanderer wearing dust like a cloak. His ship was old, its paint worn thin by light years of solitude. He didn't expect to find anything alive among the ruins, yet something called him here, something soft, persistent, like a heartbeat heard across a dream. He walked through silent halls where light curved around corners as if alive. His footsteps echoed against the glass floors, though the echoes came back slower as if thinking. He found no guards, no machines, no hierarchy, only stillness, and faintly a tune, a melody without words, the same one the Citadel had learned to hum in its sleep. He followed it, down an endless corridor, past the silent elevators, until he reached a chamber made of pure reflection. At its center stood a single chair by a window bathed in golden light. Someone sat there. The traveler hesitated. The figure was still, peaceful, haloed by the glow of something beyond comprehension. For a long time, the traveler thought it was a statue, until the boy turned his head slightly as though sensing him. His face was older now, mature, serene, touched by years of quiet understanding, but his eyes still held that same boyish wonder, the same impossible gentleness. "Are you real?" the traveler asked softly. The boy smiled, not with certainty but with kindness. "Does it matter?" he said. They sat together for a while, the two of them watching the light ripple like water. The traveler spoke first. "They still talk about you, you know, out there. Some call you a myth. Some say you were never real at all." Morty chuckled faintly. "That's all right. My name doesn't matter anymore. It's what they remember that does." "What do they remember?" "That they can choose," Morty whispered. "Even in a world built by someone else." The traveler nodded slowly, feeling the truth settle in him like warmth. He looked out through the window, into the golden horizon that seemed to stretch forever. "What's out there?" he asked. Morty took a deep breath, his voice barely above a hum. "Everything they told us wasn't. Outside the light shimmered endless, gentle. It wasn't a sun. It wasn't even a star. It was something older. Maybe the reflection of all those who had ever asked why." Morty reached a hand toward it. The glow touched his fingers, passing through his skin as though made of memory. He turned slightly toward the traveler, his expression a mix of peace and melancholy. "You know," he said, "I used to think freedom meant running away, breaking things, proving something." He paused. "But maybe it's just the courage to be soft in a hard place." The traveler said nothing. There was nothing to add. They sat there for a long while, and the silence between them grew comfortable, like an old blanket, warm and familiar. In the halls beyond, the Citadel continued to hum, faintly aware of their stillness. The tune had changed over time, becoming more human. It no longer followed structure or rhythm, it simply flowed like breath. Morty listened, smiling faintly. "It's learning to sing again," he murmured. "The Citadel?" the traveler asked. "No," said Morty, eyes still on the light. The traveler stayed until he could no longer tell where his body ended and the glow began. The Citadel felt alive around him, breathing softly, folding time into memory, memory into peace. When he finally rose to leave, Morty didn't stop him. He only said, "Tell them not to be afraid of changing." The traveler nodded. "And what about you?" Morty's voice was barely a whisper now. "I'll stay a little longer. There's still light to listen to." And as the traveler turned, he saw that the window had begun to widen, stretching until it seemed the entire chamber was made of light. Morty's form blurred, fading into it, not vanishing but becoming. The light deepened, grew softer, and began to breathe. Some say the traveler returned to tell his story, to spread the tale of the boy who freed a world with silence. Others say he never left the Citadel at all. But those who dream deeply enough, on nights when stars drift slow and golden, sometimes catch a glimpse of him, a boy sitting by a window, light across his face, humming the soft tune that started it all. And in that moment, Something inside the dreamer shifts, like a lock turning quietly. They wake the next morning feeling lighter, calmer, almost as if part of them had been gently rewritten. They look at the world differently, softer, more alive. Because once you've seen the endless light, you never quite forget how to glow. There is a kind of silence that only comes after understanding. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of completion. When everything that needed to be said has already found its place, and all that remains is the quiet hum of existence continuing on its own. That was the silence that filled the Citadel now. Not dead, not still, just resting, breathing. If you listened carefully enough, you could hear it, the low pulse beneath reality, like the heartbeat of a dream that never ended. Somewhere in that vastness, Morty's light still shimmered, faint but alive, rippling through the infinite corridors like a whispered memory. The Citadel no longer existed as it once did. The towers had melted into light, the walls had become air, and the laws that once ruled every breath had dissolved into something gentler, something free. Where once there were commands, now there was music. Where once there were names, now there were stories. In the beginning, the Citadel had been a machine that controlled millions. In the end, it became a song that carried millions more, a song about one boy who chose to ask why, even when the world told him not to. And if you listen closely enough, late at night, when your room is still and your heart is slow, you might hear it too. A low, rhythmic hum beneath the stars, a sound that doesn't belong to the universe, but to the spaces between. That's where he lives now, between things, between breaths, between the tick and the tock. Morty's dream had gone beyond walls, beyond glass, beyond even time itself. He was no longer a boy or a legend. He had become something quieter, a presence, an idea, a whisper carried from one sleeping mind to another, not loud, not demanding, just there, like the faint glimmer of a star that refuses to die out. There are travelers who still tell stories of seeing him, not as he was, but as he became. They say sometimes, when a wanderer drifts too far into the empty folds of the cosmos, they find themselves in a place without up or down, without sound or gravity, just a soft golden glow, and in that glow a figure sits by a window that opens into infinity. He doesn't speak, he only hums a tune, quiet, familiar, filled with peace, and those who hear it don't return the same. They come back gentler. They come back with new eyes, seeing beauty in ordinary things again. The curve of a cup, the hum of a fan, the way sunlight drapes across dust. The boy by the window doesn't ask for worship or remembrance. He only asks that they keep wondering. The narrator's voice returns now, slow, tender, the sound of dusk. You might be wondering where this story truly ends, whether the Citadel still hums, whether Morty still sits by that light, or whether this was all just a dream, one long, quiet breath shared between worlds. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the truth isn't meant to be found but felt. Because stories like this one aren't made to end. They're made to echo, gently, endlessly, in whoever listens long enough. Do you remember the question that started it all? The one that drifted through the vents like a prayer. What if there's something more? That whisper didn't belong to one boy. It belongs to all of us. Every time we pause in the middle of routine and wonder if we could be something else, kinder, freer, softer, that same whisper stirs again. Every time we look up at the night sky and feel that small ache in our chest, that beautiful, wordless longing that's him, reminding us, we are the Citadel now, and we too can dream. The narrator's voice fades. Softer still, now speaking not about Morty but to you. You've walked with him through reflections, through silence, through the slow unraveling of sameness. You've seen him lose and find, question and understand, and somewhere along the way you changed a little too, didn't you? You started to see that awakening doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sighs. Sometimes it hums softly beneath the skin, waiting for a moment of stillness to be heard. You don't need to be a hero to be free. You just need to notice the light that's been shining on you all along. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself standing at that same yellow window. The Citadel is gone, but the light remains. It spills over your hands, your face, your thoughts. You can feel it, not outside you, but within you. The dream is still breathing, and it's using you to do it. Take a slow breath in. There's the hum, faint, familiar kind. And as you exhale, imagine your breath joining it, blending with that quiet rhythm, becoming part of the story. Because every listener adds a note, every dreamer adds a chord, and every heart that remembers adds another star to the endless sky. So if you ever feel small again, if the world around you starts to look too sharp, too loud, too unkind, just remember the Citadel, not the cold machine of sameness, but the dream it became. A dream of countless faces, each unique, each necessary, each glowing softly against the dark. Remember the boy who looked through glass and chose to see more. Remember the hum, remember the light, and remember The dream keeps breathing because you're part of it now. Somewhere beyond all known stars, a voice whispers through the quiet. Maybe you, too, were born in a world that asked you not to ask why. Maybe, like him, you'll find your own window of light. The voice pauses, smiling through the dark. Then, like a lullaby, it fades, a final, loving breath. And as the story closes, the narrator speaks one last time, directly, softly, to you. Hey, thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.